Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday night open mic night. This is your host, Ted Steeritz, joining you from the cicada-filled air of Arkansas in mid-July. Welcome anyone who's listening. For those of you who are interested in joining, because this is an open mic night, and if you're I was going to say a responsible, mature human. If you're a human capable of acting in a responsible and mature manner, which is not the same thing, you are welcome to join in. This is, again, for the purpose of just giving people space to discuss the stuff that goes on Randos United, on the flotilla of channels known as informally and in some places as this little corner of the internet. So that link for StreamYard is in the comments. I'm trying to be more, as you can tell, get used to this kind of thing and formalize my presentation. So, as I'm the only person currently on this stream, and by popular demand, and by that I mean I think Mark and Emma said this, I am going to make a little bit of banjo music, which you can pay me if you want me to stop. That's how banjo music works. You don't pay someone to keep playing a banjo, you pay them to stop. I heard a definition of a gentleman one time. A gentleman is someone who knows how to play the banjo and doesn't. So I guess I'm going to be acting in an ungentlemanly manner. Hi, Sandy. Life is well. It's hot in Arkansas, and I've had a pretty laid back week. It was great. I did some tree work in fellow parishioner's yard. We made his yard a mess. So that was great. Yes, it's a banjo. It's not Signs and Wonders. Those of you who went to Chino know what Signs and Wonders were. You witnessed Signs and Wonders. This will have none of that greatness because I don't have Chad, for one thing. So. I'll subject you to no more. Sandy, I just do it to entertain myself and my kids. I actually just know how to play the banjo. I don't know how to play anything on the banjo. So, yeah, if I sat down to it, I could probably figure out how to play songs, and I play with my wife a little bit, and I can pick out melodies on it. But mostly I just like to, what do they call it? Noodle. I like to noodle on the banjo a lot. So it's fun. Yeah, I should engage with more opportunities to play it with other people. It's funny. I've been playing it like a little bit for years and years and years. And there's this funny thing where when I started to really do a whole bunch more equipment work, my banjo playing got way better. And my hypothesis is that whatever is going on up here that is involved in creating enough neurosomatic flexibility that lets you translate emotions from pasta noodles, rice noodles, banjo noodles. Yeah, the banjo noodles, those are hard to swallow. Also realized that I think the strings on this banjo are like 11 years old. So one of the things we did this week was I ordered new banjo strings for the first time in actually a decade. So I think that the sound on it will be a little bit better. Any rate, yeah. So when I started doing a lot more equipment operation, my banjo playing got better, and I think it's because there's some process that goes from stuff up here, chat music, and poetry night. I actually have poetry, and I wanted to save my poetry for when Mark got here, and he's here, so I'm going to read it because Mark always talks about contrast or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is. Is it contrast, Mark? Talk about the necessity for contrast or comparison or something. At any rate, this is a poem, one of my favorites, by Father Gerard Manley Hopkins, who's one of my favorite poems, and it is called Pied Beauty. And he says this: contrast, thank you. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose mole all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire coal, chestnut falls, finches' wings, landscapes plotted and pierced, fold, fallow, and plow, and all trades their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, dazzle dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. So there's Pied Beauty for Mark for contrast. Yep. So to understand, Sandy, is my link working? Is the link? If the link isn't working, I can put it in again. Yeah, let's see. It's the one. It's showing the same one. When I can drop it in there again. Yeah. Here we go. Yeah, Mark, I've been here. Try that link. Mark, I wanted to bring this up because every time I've heard you bring up the need for contrast, I think everyone thinks you're falling into this sort of hard dualism of like you need evil for good or something like that, which I don't know if that's what you mean. I don't buy it at all. I think evil is something, to use like Vervakian language, something like a parasitic aspect of the good. I mean, obviously, right? Being is good. There you have it. So in order for evil to be, yeah, excellent. Thank you. So I thought that good. This is good, Mark. I'm glad we're good here. Sometimes it's hard. Greetings, Mark. My wife said that I need to make sure that I greet every person and ask them, what it is that they're after, what they want to say. I don't feel like I need to do it with you though. Hello, Sandy. I guess I have to do that for Sandy. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well. I'm very well. I'm glad you chose to join us today. This is great.
I am. I'm going to be slightly distracted for a second. What? Okay. How are you? And I may pull out for a second.
No, that's fine. I'll finish what I thought with Mark. So you take your time.
And read your poem again slowly for me, would you?
I will. This is actually what Hopkins wants, which I love this.
Okay.
Yeah, he wants his poem to be, he wants his poems to be read multiple times. So he says, this is Pied Beauty. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire coal, chestnut falls, finches' wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, and plow, and all trades their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change. praise him.
This is not a poet that I have really known.
Mm.
You also, so did I see Poetry Foundation in your link as well?
Yeah, that's the poem. I dropped
Yeah.
it in.
Yeah. I just looked it up. I follow Poetry Foundation stuff. So
if you remember at the conference when they threw a video of me up on the big screen right as the conference is ending on Saturday.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that was Hopkins, and I did not know that. Mark, the context of this is the Friday. I guess it was Friday night. Some of us were sitting around the campfire at the campsite reading poetry, and someone, I think Grim got a video of it. Grim Grizz got a video of it, and it's like, okay, that's funny. And then they threw it up like as the conference is ending, and everyone's like saying goodbye to the speakers.
That was awesome. That was great. I love that.
I look up and there's like a 10-foot tall Ted face up on the screens in this church.
It was perfect. It was beautiful.
That's cool.
But Mark, I do think, at least, I mean, this is my immediate thing when I hear contrast is dualism, and like obviously not. And so, but to get that picture, sometimes you have to like I just think that a poem like that's really helpful. It's like, no, we're not talking about dualism. We're talking about contrast, which Hopkins is.
Yeah, it's strange, right? Because it's like, go to your computer, which you have, and adjust the contrast, and let me know if there's a change between two things, because there isn't.
Yeah.
Like, where would you? What do you interact with that says contrast that works in a dualistic or binary fashion? The answer is absolutely nothing, and like it just no, right? It's like for photographers, right? Because I am a photographer. It's like white balance, white balance, and people understand. White balance is impossible. Period. Yeah. Full stop. End of state. Right? It really. There's an arbitrary decision at some point, right? And so not all
white balance is impossible. White balance is what you
right
choose to do, isn't it?
No, there's no right answer to white balance. You
that's
cannot
why
white balance a photo.
This is a painting with no contrast.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Right. And the reason why you cannot see without contrast is because, and I forget, it might have been PBS, but I don't know. But years and years ago, there was a guy in Japan, and he was born without sight. He's born without sight, right? So he's in his 20s or 30s or something, and they figure out, oh my goodness, we now have the surgical procedure to reconnect his optic nerve to his brain, and that's the only thing that's wrong with his sight, and then he'll be able to see.
Whoa.
Right. This is like mine. Because most people who can't see, that's not their problem. Like almost nobody has a non-fully grown optic nerve from the brain to the eye, from the end of the nerve to the brain, or from the end of the nerve to the eye. In fact, I think if I remember correctly, it grows from the eye backwards, right? In development. So that's a rare thing, right? But they've got this guy, so they're like, all right. So they do the surgery, right? And at this time, and this was the surgery was really, it might have been a 90s surgery even. It was way back there, right? But at this time, they have all the stuff, right, to test that the surgery works. So they've got him hooked up, and they're checking on his eyes, right? And all the information is there. It's all showing up, and he can't see.
Of course not. He doesn't know how to interpret it.
Yeah.
Nope. That's not even it. It's way worse. Yeah. So it turns out that by a fluke of trying to test his vision, they noticed that when he moves his head, he can find the line. But when he's not moving his head, he can't. And he can only find it for like a billionth of it. Like he can barely, oh no, I see the line, and then it's gone. The minute he stops, it's gone. And then they finally figure out that, in fact, the reason why he can't see is because you need to move your eyes to be able to see. And what happens is, in a normal case, when you grow up with the nerves attached correctly, very quickly, the fovea of your eye just moves really, really fast. And your eyes are doing this all the time.
Yeah.
They're constantly moving. And that's true for every creature. The inside of your eye is actually physically basically vibrating at a high speed. And it's that vibration that allows you to actually sense things. Like you otherwise, and it's so easy. Like anybody who's done any electronics would realize this immediately, right? Because it's the baseline condition. So if you work with an oscilloscope, you don't even need to work with an oscilloscope. But if you ever worked with or saw somebody work with an oscilloscope, what do? They set everything to a baseline, right? It's like resetting a scale, right? You got to zero out the scale, right? And then you're measuring the difference between that thing and something else. And so all signal theory works that way. So it when you look at it, when you actually look at the nerve endings and stuff, and you translate that in an oscilloscope, which is a little weird thing to do, but also it works. You notice that it's just a line. Like it doesn't, right? And then when you move the head or whatever, or the eyes in this case, right? Then all of a sudden the signal happens. Nothing's changed. It's just motion.
What's one of the things that immediately strikes me about that is that that's like the same thing that is the reason that like dopaminergic drugs just like don't work long term, right? Because on way higher levels, your body is doing, especially neurologically, it's all about homeostasis. It's like, let's keep it at this level. And so then you crank this thing all the way up here and it's like, oh, hey, wow, that feels really good. But it's not changing. It's just staying up there. And you're like, all right, well, we're going to adjust everything down to that. And then when whatever that was, those artificially inflating these neurotransmitters.
That's why that's what cocaine is. Yeah. You take cocaine, right? Yeah. And then it's like, oh, you need more cocaine. That's the physical addiction side.
Yeah.
Right. And you can fix that, but it doesn't fix the addiction in most cases, because the addiction's not merely physical, because there's other baselines going on. And it turns out that the relationship baseline is more important. That's also why people tend to change addictions. Like you get off cocaine and you start collecting screwdrivers or whatever, right? Like,
so what happened with the guy's eyes?
Day's story, but
what's that, Sandy?
What happened with the guy's eyes?
Well, once they did something to train him to move the fovea, and once they started that process, that it adjusted. And then, he was never able to see really well, but he had sight, that he didn't have previously. Mm-hmm. There she is.
Hi, Emma.
Hello, Emma. Hey, we can't hear you. Are you trying to talk to us?
Not really.
Now you're good. Hey, I heard that last week after I left, you wanted to talk about Paralandra. So, like, whenever you want to jump in there and
ask. Are you guys going to talk about Lewis?
Yeah.
Yes.
Gosh, I have not climbed into my storage unit to dig out my C.S. Lewis books, but I'm like, I have read those things like ages ago. They're awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Sandy, I was just going to ask, since we were already talking about art, you didn't do that piece behind you, did you?
I didn't do that? Okay.
Did you do that painting? I'm asking if you did that painting behind you.
In high school.
Oh,
wow. I was supposed to, my teacher asked my mom to promise to make me go to OCAD, but I didn't. She made me go to U of T instead, with where my uncle went, study psychology and religion.
I love that. Also, that's the first time I've ever seen Mark use his door. I didn't even know if it was a real door or not.
There you go. This is the size I play with now.
Oh, that's really pretty.
Yeah, I go the wrong way.
Well, Sandy, my mother, I don't know if you've seen these. This is like a place that
I saw you hold them up once, yeah.
Yeah, my parents. So my mother does all this stuff. She kind of does parent mothering.
Oh, here we go. Everybody's holding up pictures. Emma, where are your pictures?
You forced me to get out my only piece of art that I've done.
Look at that.
I don't have any.
Sandy,
I just have this.
Nice, baby.
Watercolor.
Professionalism.
Oh, Emma, that's great. This is great. No, Emma, you're an artisan as opposed to an artist, right? That's the distinction.
Thank you.
You're an artisan.
Yeah.
Artists are artists. Doesn't matter.
But arguably, part of the problem is that we have too many artists and not enough artisans. I don't know. Maybe it's something like that.
Well, that's an interesting framing to think about.
Yeah,
things.
I've never.
It is interesting.
It just came. I'm not. We can talk about it, but I'm not going to
like
talk
it.
about it.
No, we gotta
Tell me
weasel
about
Erla
artisans.
into asking her question of you, though.
Well,
yeah.
no,
Give her the
because
chance
I
to
forgot
show
it and I didn't have time this week to go back through Paralandra.
It'll come back up. It'll come back. The way these things,
It'll
if you
come
just
back
hang
up
out
at
with us
some
for a little
point.
bit, it'll repercolate. So, Sandy, this is how I've heard it described: is that artisans are people concerned with like they're using what you might call like artistic techniques, but they're creating like stuff for life, basically. So, like clothing, pots, pillars, doors, like rosaries, things like that.
Here in Canada, we simply say fabric artists or metal artists. Or
It's becoming more of the way to talk about it. I think because there's a certain prestige attached to uselessness.
Yes.
And so artisans are almost embarrassed by the fact that what they make is useful.
Are you serious? Is that like an American thing or what?
No.
I think it's a modern thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the part of the idea behind
Nothing
lawns.
is useless.
Yeah.
How can tell me one thing that's actually completely and utterly useless because you've never used it. You haven't talked about it.
No, it depends. It depends on your definition of useless. But like people making things that you like do something with versus that you just look at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, maybe like functional is a better word than useful. I mean, at some point you have to make a distinction between something that like that say.
But even then, like art definitely has a function.
Well, yeah. No, how about this? Like that framing cannot work. Like cannot work. It's impossible.
I'm sorry, Mark. I'm just gonna laugh because I'm gonna count. Do you have a bingo card for how many times you say framing or no or all the things that people?
No, you can make bingo cards for that though. You should sell them. You could probably make some money. You just got to give me 10%. Yeah, I think that the problem with materialism is that suddenly material becomes valueless because it's mechanized, and then there is no room for the artisan maybe. Like they all view what they do as, well, I just make widgets and that's why my job is meaningless. It's like, so even if you make it by hand at some point, it's been demystified by the materialism. And because it's demystified, you don't want to be an artisan. I mean, because they don't exist in some, like, what does that mean in the material world? There's no artisan in the material world because like it's stamped out by a machine. Like my version is inferior because it's not regular and smooth and stamped out by a machine. And I think that there's probably something to that.
Okay, so
I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
I agree.
I want to throw a little thread out there and see what y'all think of this because I like.
I'm sorry, did you say bread? What did you say?
Thread, I think.
A thread. I'm gonna throw some bread at you. Yes. Wow. There's a restaurant about 2 hours north of here that's got these obnoxious billboards where it's the home of the throwed rolls. They're like, apparently the restaurant shtick is that the waiters throw the rolls at you across the restaurant. So yeah. So Mary Harrington. What is her term? What's that?
That came up. Isn't that Jewish? That came up on a.
Throwing the bread?
You're not literally allowed to throw your bread. I saw this on a YouTube video. You're not literally allowed to like throw bread at somebody, but you can toss bread in front of somebody.
Amazing.
I have to ask about that again.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Sandy, but it sounds great. So I think Mary Harrington is the one who talks about something like it's like digital. It's like, it's been so long since I've seen this. But she connects the sort of like digital virtual world, automated Gnosticism. It's like automation. What's that, Mark?
The cyborgocracy, is that what it is?
Yes, but she connects it with Gnosticism. because the whole idea of transhumanism is this. Transhumanism is fundamentally Gnostic. I'll assert that one. We can get into it if we want to, but it's about getting out of the embodied human experience, right? It's like your body is a thing to transcend, hence transhumanism.
Right.
But I wonder on this thing of like uselessness in art is this notion that when you make, say, a pot beautiful, or a towel beautiful, or the pillar of your house beautiful, it says the mundane stuff of this world is worth hallowing. It's worth putting the effort into the things that are involved in the mundane, say, care of your body, care of your family, care of, and like, we actually don't want that. I mean, the way that so many of us live our lives is we kind of like do the bare minimum to keep ourselves alive. And then we jump into this, parallel digital world of light. Right. And there's something like when the world around us is the everyday things of life are beautiful, not in the sense that we can look past them, but that forces us to look at them, or we recognize the amount of effort. And none of this, I'm not going to defend any of this as being like consciously done or anything, but it just seems to fit. It's like, the fact that I'm just blasting through all this stuff and giving it as little attention as possible so I can get back to my Gnosticism, my digital Gnosticism, it gets at me. It testifies against me is maybe how I would put it. Yeah.
Hey, can you say that again?
Okay.
Somewhat like the poem, only you're allowed to change the words a tad. You need to.
Great. Well, the second time
I want to rethink what you just said.
So I'm presenting a story, and the story is that at some point in the middle of last century, we started trying to live in this world of lights, right? That was the television and then the computers, and that's a disembodied life. And as we've moved towards that, what we do is we do the minimum to take care of our bodies because we're still embodied, so that we can then go and inhabit this world of light. And I'm suggesting that matches Gnosticism pretty closely, some forms of Gnosticism. And that when we make things involved in everyday life, the shelter over our heads, cooking food, caring for people, clothing our bodies, when we make those things obviously beautiful and obviously worth effort, it testifies to the wrongness of this sort of attempt at Gnosticism.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm listening.
Yeah. So I don't know.
I'm double checking.
You're double checking, you said?
Gnosticism is not a word that comes up in my everyday life on a regular basis. So I'm just double checking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nah. All I'm getting there is blah, 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 blah.
Gnosticism is a little bit like Protestantism, I'll be honest, in terms of like, you can say things about Gnosticism and there's definitely exceptions to it. That's what I mean. That's how I mean that it's like Protestantism.
There's more parallels than that. But yeah. Look, if you disenchanted the world, right, through, we'll say, material needs, right, and materialism is one form of Gnosticism, then yeah, the fact that there are other people out there like the Amish, right, just enchanting everything they touch and everything they do is a judgment against you, right? Because action is judgment. Because you can't act without first judging.
You can't act without first judging? Interesting.
Yeah.
I have a series of live streams on that. Discernment, judgment, and action in that order.
I apologize, Mark, but I find some of your explanatory patterns to be my brain.
So
I spent far too long living with somebody who sounded very, very, who I was told loved to pontificate, and I have learned how to dissociate well enough that sometimes when language hits a certain peak tone,
you just do it automatically.
Yeah, I do. Like even when I'm trying to listen to things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true for a lot of people. And it's a good technique. I mean, you don't want to be enchanted by people who are articulate and fooling you. So
it's a
Mark-
great technique if you could use it on command, but when it just happens, it's irritating.
Well, right. Well, you have to be sounding out the right things. Like, it's very hard to differentiate between Peterson and Sam Harris, right? And we saw that in the debates. That's when people go, "Oh, this side," everybody on one side beforehand is like, "My guy won the debate." Everybody on the other side beforehand said, "No, my guy won the debate," right? Obviously, they're of roughly equal enchantment in terms of articulation, and there's no discernment of the argument.
What's the difference between enchantment and enchanting? As in, we were talking about artists and artisans, and I'm sitting here listening to you lovely gentlemen saying all these words, and my entire internal focus is on the artistic or artisan quality of the piece emanating off of Emma. I love
you're attracted to that. Like, that's enchanted. That's a form of enchantment, right?
I know. I like playing with words. I'm sorry.
So here's a Mark. I don't know if you've ever picked this up, but the word glamour is actually from grammar, and in the Middle Ages contained both the linguistic and the occult connotations. And so, like, a glamorous woman was someone who was engaged with the things that could allow her to enchant men. That's why a woman was glamorous. And then the people who knew grammar were the people who knew magic.
Yes.
So when you say you need to be careful who you're listening to because of their ability to enchant you, the first thing that pops up in my head is grammar and glamour. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't use it that way anymore, right? And that's the problem. Glamour is now just the mystical side. A glamorous woman is just somebody who is using pure beauty enchantment or something, right?
Yeah, look, this is one of the things, like, I would really love to be able to talk to DC Schindler at some point about beauty, because look, there's something in fairy tales called the beautiful fae. And, like, we don't talk about the beautiful fae, and we need to talk about the beautiful fae. And my favorite example of the beautiful fae, and this is
hold on. Why? What is it about the fae that's so interesting that everybody misses? I know what it is.
Here's the reason we need to talk about the beautiful fae, because we live in our society. There's never been a civilization more dominated by the beautiful fae than the one we're living in. And one of the indications of that is that we can't see it, and so no one talks about it. And so I think about it's one of George MacDonald's two longer stories. It's either Lilith or Fantastes. It's Fantastes.
I think it's Fantastes, because I think I know what you're going to talk about.
There's this one.
I do not. I just keep thinking about my neighbor whose middle name was Faye.
So there's, well, what's interesting is Fae. There's Fae like related to the fairy realm, and then there's Fae like dangerous, like perilous.
That's it. Yes, so the fae are not good. That is not right. And even fairies are not good.
Ooh,
fairies are mischievous, and fae are always mischievous with a tinge of maliciousness. And yeah, that's the tradition.
You don't want to go there, Ted.
All right.
You don't want to go there. It says fae will steal adults as well, particularly musicians and poets.
Listen, Sandy, I don't deal with the fae except under the blood of Christ. So if you need,
Explains a very weird story I was asked to read once, as I belong to writers groups.
Oh,
I belong to about 3 to 5 writers groups.
So there's this creature called the Willow Woman, and as soon as you see the pattern in the Willow Woman, you see it like all over the place. And Mark, remember when we were talking about the siren in Purgatorio last week? Yes. So the Willow Woman is on the front. When you look at her from straight in front of you, she looks like the most beautiful woman in the world. But when she turns around, she is a concave impression of the front of a person, right? So she's not hollow, she's flat. And so from the front, if you can imagine a mask that you put on, when you flip the mask around, it's the concave version of the face. Yeah. And then on the back side, she's all tree bark.
Nice.
And she'll eat you. That's the other thing you need to know. So she looks like a beautiful woman on the front. There's nothing to her, and she will eat you. Like this is the thing. And if you listen to Latin American fairy tales, like in the last 200 or 300 years, like La Llorona, they're all beautiful women, and if you get entranced by them, then they eat you. Like that's the story over and over and over. They might be like on the road, by a river, but the thing is like, hey, young men traveling at dusk, when you see that beautiful woman, walk on the other side of the road. Don't say hi to her, because she'll probably actually have a horse's head with like dog teeth and eat you.
I hate it when that happens.
Yes, it's just the worst. And so this is the thing about beauty that has to come in, is like into these discussions about beauty, which I'm glad everyone's talking about beauty. It's great, but like the world used to know that you can't just say, oh, I feel like that's beautiful, and so therefore it is, because there's all sorts of things that look beautiful that aren't and will eat you. And
or they're not good. The problem is they equate beauty and goodness, or they collapse goodness to beauty, right? We've collapsed goodness to truth. And then epistemology, right? That doesn't work. And now everyone's like, no, beauty. And it's like, no, you still need the goodness.
When you were talking earlier, and you were talking about artisan, and then said, now when you make something useful and then you make it beautiful, I'm like, wait a minute, why isn't useful beautiful? Like I'm picturing the texture of a bowl that's perfectly balanced. It's going to sit on the table. It's going to be suited to whatever you're using it for. Is that not beautiful? To me, it is.
Nuclear weapons are beautiful. You ever see a hydrogen bomb? Beautiful.
Well, okay, so Sandy, let me
only at a great distance on TV or somewhere in one of those light moments.
Well, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter what scale. Actually, hydrogen bombs, because they have that footage of the hydrogen bomb they set off in the South Pacific, right? Wow, it is gorgeous. Super destructive though, like the camera was before it melted, but pretty.
But is that what I mean by beauty? I don't know.
No, so Sandy, I can at least say something that when you said that about the bowl, right? So that's like an intrinsic beauty to the bowl, right? That it fulfills its function, and like you can see the craft of it, right? It's balanced, it's proportioned. There's this other thing though, where then you go and you look up like old drinking horns made out of beaten gold, because I read the Song of Roland, and then I got sucked in at one point to looking at all this Wikipedia articles about these civilizations in the in the Baltic and all that, and so there's this extra level where it's not how do I get the wine in my mouth, but it's like we made it so it looks like a golden horse or something, and you're like, oh, that's beautiful. It's beautiful in a different way than it could have just been, and so the word ornamentation is really loaded, but it's something like that. It is.
And I'm not sure I mean something in terms of ornamentation or lack of ornamentation. I was even debating saying something about, Mark said something about, or I think it was Mark said something about feeling. You can describe something as I feel it this or I feel it that. But my problem is my oldest is deaf. And I am a tactile processor in some ways. So when I think of feel, I'm like, well, I'm differentiating between, do you mean I can describe it with my emotions or with feeling? I used to tease people. I'm like Spider-Man. I listen from the middle of my hands. Like my body, I listen from the physical. Oh. So when I talk about the bowl, I'm thinking that. And when you're saying what you were just saying, I think about days I would sit. I was on the worship team at my church. My son's deaf. He sits in the front row. I'm used to sitting down there with him to interpret, talk about what the words are. And it's not even just words. Like a word is anyways, you guys know what words are. But words aren't just that thing that sits on those tiny little pieces of paper. They're these concepts that live and breathe in the air. And when I'm signing, I'm thinking, oh, Bible, old words into new words, into what do I what do I understand of the words into how do I describe that in ASL? What are the choices of different signs that I can put for, like fear, frightened, fear, awe, it's jaw-droppingly whatever, and I'm thinking there's the it's not I was actually going to say convoluted. You and Mark can tease this apart because my brain is going, he said contrast, but my mouth wants to say convoluted. This thing.
Context.
It's not just context, but where people will say, "Oh, it's so beautiful. I love watching you sign to Jacob," and I'm thinking, "Oh, it's so beautiful. I love how it feels." The energy through I love how it feels to express, and we're talking kind of the same and completely different.
Yeah, but look, there's a beauty in utility. Like that's I think what part of what Ted was getting at. Like there's a beauty to things that eat you. There's a beauty to things that kill you. There's a beauty because there's a beautiful purpose to the quicksand that sucks you under. Like it's not like beauty is not goodness. You can't reduce goodness to beauty or truth.
Like when you think, because I'm talking about signing a sermon. So if a sermon's going to eat me and kill me, okay.
But look, there's a beauty to swearing. There's a beauty to coming up with a way to kill somebody. Like, and you can sign about that. Like, there's a beauty to a bad story. There's a beauty to illiterate, right? But see, the beauty's there, but the goodness isn't. And that's goodness and beauty are separate items, and that's what Ted's getting at with the Fae. Like, we need to talk about the fact that beauty doesn't solve that problem.
And they're different linguistically. He's talking in a place where they're the same thing. So if I say I'm thirsty, I might want a drink of water, but depending on how you sign it, you could be saying something completely inappropriate for online conversation at this point.
Yeah,
exact same hand shape, hand movement, everything.
Because you need that context, right?
Context,
Meaning doesn't exist in context. It exists in context. And the problem with the Fae is that if you know anything about where the Fae came from, if you actually read any of it, they're not good. Like that is goodness is not the only thing that they are. They can be good.
Well, and see, I wasn't talking only about the Fae. So like I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying, but I'm pondering that place where I'm thinking about what you said past tense. I'm thinking about what was discussed present tense, and I'm thinking about why is my instinct in my mouth movement going off to say convoluted instead of either context or contrast. But that's because instinctively there is something we know about. The same can be different.
It is convoluted because when you think about the Fae or the beautiful, so you say, oh well, Fae are beautiful. There's a beauty to the Fae for sure. Like that's their whole trick to some extent, right? Yeah. And you equate that with goodness. That's convoluted because you've taken three separate contexts, right?
And I was
together into one, and that's a convolution. Technically, it's actually technically a convolution. It's a technically correct grammatical word.
Yeah. So Sandy, I want to hit on something that you're saying, and you're talking about signing. So this is actually great. I've been going back and taking one more stab at Barfield's poetic diction, which I've never made it through.
Teach me, if I have conversations on this over the next while, teach me the names. Barfield.
Owen Barfield, okay. his book on poetic diction. So he says, and I just think this is so great. He says he says poetry. When he's talking about poetics, he says fundamentally it's something like the reason that you have a completely different response to the name prophets old and old prophets. Right? Those are two completely different things. And so, he's got 6 different poems like short portions of poems. One of them is it is a pidgin English description, and I wish I had this book with me. I didn't think we were going to, but it's a pidgin English description of a 3-stacked steamship, right? So all it is it's a pidgin English description, And so it's working with these tools of linguistic tools that are very different from, say, taught British English. But then because it forces the speaker to see the world in a different way, then I can come to it and I can see the ship in that steamship in a way that I hadn't before. And it makes it poetically beautiful. So when you are going through that process of translation, because it is a form of translation, right? And first of all, that wakes you up to all the ambiguity, the possible convolutions there. This is what happens when you translate. Because I've lived in a bilingual context before, and you start to see these things. You're like, languages are not, there's not the one bucket for saying a thing. It's like every single, you have all sorts of, so like even the verb to be in Spanish, there's two different verbs to be, right? That we use, and it's not like there's
sorry.
And then there's,
I'm not sorry. It's a habit. I'm glancing at Mark's face listening to you say that.
and there's two different verbs for to know, right? And so there's these distinctions in Spanish and English that are collapsed into one word in English. And so what you're doing when you're going from spoken English to the sign language, is it ASL?
What are your Spanish words that you're mentioning?
So with to be, there's ser and a star, which roughly correspond to something.
You're right.
Something
I
like
did that in high school.
Something like qualities and states ish, right? Like you'd use ser to say like soy un hombre, like I am a man.
Yeah.
And then there's like
that's why my instinct is ask what they are.
Yes, I am tired, right? So that's like a thing that's going to pass over me or pass through me. But then you get all sorts of interesting things, like some places they use ser for marriage and other places they use a star for marriage. And you can see this reciprocal thing. It's like, how do we view marriage? Is it something is it an ontological change, or is it a possibly passing state? And then with knowledge, it's saber and conocer. And saber is would be something like propositional knowledge, and conocer would be something like familiarity. So, conozco.
This is like
German does that too.
Yeah.
I was trying to explain to the guy in the seat behind me at Chino. Whoa, crap! What's the Vervaeke word? Oh shoot. Does it start with an E? One of his E words. Anyway, how you embody something, maybe, or something. I don't know if it was embodiment, but it was in one of those conversations, and he was talking about how he didn't get the point of what he was getting at in this. I'm gonna have to go back and look it up now. It'll bother me.
Yeah.
And I said, I think what I said to him, I haven't really listened to Vervaeke. This is completely new to me, all this stuff. I'm just getting into it. But I think it's like ASL, where you can say, well, do you know something? Or if I ask you, do you know Florida? They'll say touch, finished. Do you know, as in your second usage of the one that starts with a C in the Spanish.
Conocer.
Yeah.
So
because there's a different expectation to what that means.
Yeah. So there's some really other, since we're just running on interesting things that are in my head because I learned Spanish, saber is also the verb that's used for to taste. So that's interesting.
Makes so much sense. Yeah. I don't know why, but I'm like, everything in me goes, of course it is.
Yeah. So all that to say, right, you're getting all these, now we're all getting these like poetic, what you might call poetic insights, because I'm moving back and forth between English and Spanish, and you're seeing the world a way that you couldn't before. Well, Sandy, when you translate from English into ASL, you're doing that the whole time. And that's why you're like, oh yeah, well, it just does stuff. It does stuff. You see things. And it's, when we were talking in Chino, I love that you were signing. You would get when you really get into the conversation, you would start signing at the same time. And what's funny is I already tried to do that. It's just that my hands are basically meaningless, but I'm actually grasping at that. I'm constantly, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to feel out. even think about the language we use. I'm trying to feel out how I would say that. I'm trying to grasp that, it's on and on and on and on. And so you're actually afforded the opportunity to do that, which, Sandy, you weren't around. This is maybe 3 weeks ago. Mark and I we were jiving on something, and we were talking about. I can't remember what your example was, Mark, but mine was that I didn't learn to read until I was 8, and then I couldn't spell at all until I was 13. And so that gap between 8 to 13, I really couldn't spell well until I was 18. Honestly, I was like years behind for that 5 years. What ended up happening is when I had to take written tests, I got really, really good at finding spellings like in the test somewhere. It's like, oh, I need that word, and I'd scan through it and find the word, and then I could, or look around the classroom or whatever. So that when I actually, caught up in that and could sort of spell okay now I've just got this skill, which is being really, really good at finding information somewhere in the environment. And so we were talking about how we have these idiosyncrasies that when we haven't gotten over them, they isolate us from people. I can't spell, right? I can't do these things that other people can. But when I transcend that and it becomes integrated into me, then all of a sudden it becomes this awesome blessing to me and the people around me. And so when you have this idiosyncrasy, right, which is that your child is deaf, and so you had to learn sign language to communicate with them in that way. But now that you have that, it becomes this blessing to you and all these people around you. It's cool.
I used to tell people, so I went to I don't know if I always waved my hands around, but I used to say, well, I went to a very heavily Italian high school, and I've always kind of waved my hands around. But now that I have Jacob, I actually can say something while waving my hands around.
Oh my goodness.
Well, and it is that. I mean, look, possibly the best thing Vervaeke has is this idea of participatory knowledge, right? Yeah. Even though I disagree, it's not knowledge. He's not describing knowledge, but there in the model we use, it is 2 types of knowledge, right? The 4 P's are information, but one type of knowledge is all about the interaction, right? It's the intuitive knowledge. And so having an interaction with things is different from stating them, because once you make an utterance, right, or you propose something, we'll call it a proposition, right? It's dead. It is set in stone. It's solid in some sense. And that's the limitation of language. Once you speak it, it's set. Now you can speak it into the future, right? And then it only becomes what you spoke. But then, of course, that doesn't work because the world entropy moves, right? And so that's the problem of language that everybody's always pointing to.
You just used the word entropy and move in the same sentence, which was really cool. Because I was thinking, sorry.
No, you're great. It's just a lot of fun to have you on. So
I'm very weird, and I really admit it. I love how I think, but I entertain myself easily. So what I liked about that was I was thinking about movement, and I was thinking about something I saw that Joseph had posted one of the other channels about how in space they're looking at the vibration. Everything is constantly vibrating. You guys probably already know this, and I kind of suspect it, but it's nice to hear people talk about things. Movement, language. When you say you can disagree with Vervaeke's choice of word and description, while at the same time acknowledging it references something, it's getting at something. And what I wanted to ask you guys was this place that you're kind of discussing and asking about right now, how much does it have to do with movement and vibration? Because the example I was going to use in asking this, when I was still going to my old church, I would help with some of the women's groups, and they would have leaders, but in certain things they would actually have facilitators. You're not supposed to actually sit there and be the teacher. You are guiding the discussion. And I would often find that there was signals in the group that I would pick up where there was somebody who had something to say, and if I would slowly, intentionally turn and look at that person, the rest of the group would pick it up. But if I didn't, the people that talked 99.9% of the time would talk right over top of everybody. And so I became aware of that and would often guide the group, not saying anything, but simply looking person to person. So I'm
Yeah,
curious.
women point. Like there's a lot there saying women point.
There's so much there.
Right?
There's
Right.
so
It's
much
not just
there.
it's not just women actually, because when Jacob was Jacob's 36 now, and he's only just really starting to use the linguistics that we taught him, that I spent so much time feeding into him, kind of sat inside somewhere and percolated. But when he was little, and he still had home visiting teachers, deaf teachers, well, they weren't deaf, but then they came from the program. Some of them were deaf. But this one particular one, she's hearing, she's thinking, very hearing. She's got her typical educational format. She's got her boxes. We're going to practice sorting. She's getting him to answer her and an action. Where does the circle go? Where does the square go? Put any label on it you want, whatever. Tell me where I'm going to put such and such, trying to force him to use his words. I also happened to have a communication disorder specialist there that day because he had multiple issues. I'm saying to this home visiting teacher, he's answering you. She's going, he's not answering me. He's just sitting there. He's not doing anything. And I went, no, he's answering you. And at one point, the communication specialist speaks up and she goes, technically, he is answering you. He's using what we call an eye point. He is not using his hands to point at when you're telling him to point, but he is looking exactly right where he needs to in answer to you. That is an eye point.
That's eye direction and detection.
And that's what you were.
That's Simon Baron-Cohen. But when women pay attention to something, all the men also pay attention to that thing. Men don't have that effect. Well, look, I mean, it was my Orthodox Jewish friend. One day I went off. Can you imagine such a thing? I went off on him about Israel because he's an Israel supporter, and I was like, and I'm not an Israel supporter, but I'm like, listen, Israel puts these commercials on my TV, and on the stupid commercials they say men and women are equal. Okay, but you know what? Women can't worship the same point of the Wailing Wall as men, and that's not equal. And I went off on a half a dozen examples of how they're not equal in Israel, right? Because by American standards, they're not equal at all, right? And he gets this sly look on his face, and I'm like, oh, I'm screwed. He's gonna absolutely nail me, right? I know I'm completely done. I'm like, uh-oh, I don't know what he's gonna hit me with, but like I'm finished. This argument is over, and he just won. And he says, no, Mark, it's worse. And I was like, uh-oh, now I'm like, oh, that hole just got deeper, and I'm at the bottom of it, right? And he says, when you go to temple, the men are on the floor and the women are in the balcony. And I was just like, whoa. And he goes, because if you put the women where the men can see them, they won't pay attention to the rabbi. And I just like nuclear weapon, right? So my arguments are all void and invalid, right? I'm pretty stupid. I'm like, oh, I see. But to be fair, like the Israeli definition of equal is not the U.S. definition of equal. It's, of course, way more useful than our definition. And so it's like,
have we veered off of beauty and the functional?
I think we've gone way past that.
No, we didn't at all, because the men are swayed by the beauty of the women.
I know, that's why.
Right. And the thing you were saying about vibration, the implication of the story I was telling earlier about the blind Japanese guy, we can't sense things that aren't moving at all. Whether they were actually, quote, there in some sense or not, which I think is a useless thing to think about, but it wouldn't matter. We would not be able to find them, technically speaking, because we couldn't measure them, because there's no change. And you can't measure something that has no change because it doesn't register anywhere. There's no measurement to be taken. It's basic gauge theory, which is very difficult for people to understand. But if you look up gauge theory, you can kind of get a sense for, motion is required.
So here's a weird question. Then wouldn't the proper definition of equal be somewhere around entropy?
No, because entropy is what the statement of an entropy and time are tied up in ways that I don't quite understand. They might be the same thing, but I don't think so. But the problem with entropy is that things can't stay the same in the material realm. That's what entropy is.
That's right.
I think that was my point. The only way you could possibly achieve equal is if nothing's ever moving, therefore entropy.
Yeah. So Sandy, I want to take a totally different tack on what you said, and I'm going to bring this up because of the two conversations that I've had with Karen Wong actually connect with a lot of this stuff here. And so we've been talking about this book called Vestige of Eden, Image of Eternity, which is by this molecular biologist who's a Thomistic scholar as well. And
play this slowly. It's called
what?
He's a great. I'm hoping I can meet him at some point. This is the book we're going through.
Wait a minute. I'm out of visual range. Okay, that's really
Vestige
beautiful.
of
Vestige of Eden.
What's its title?
Vestige of Eden, Image of Eternity. Let me type that in.
That's a pretty title.
Yeah, actually, just type it. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Vestige of
So, speaking of, right, I'm like, how do you spell vestige again? Double checking to make sure I don't make a fool of myself.
VEST.
Yes, it's
IGE.
It's nice.
I.
It is
Okay.
I. Yep. That was the one I had to check on. Image.
Because I'm going, we're saying as if it's an A, but my fingers wanting to go I. I'm like, wait, vestige. Vestige.
So he's pulling from this sort of framework of looking at reality that St. Thomas Aquinas articulated in the 1200s, which he's pulling from basically the synthesis of Aristotle into the Neoplatonic world of the Middle Ages, because Aristotle didn't show back up in the West until the reintroduction in like mid 1000s. Em, I'm looking at you for confirmation on this. I think I've got this right.
Yeah, around then. I'm really bad at dates, so
Okay.
I can't just like pull them out.
So it's basically like 150 to 200 years after Aristotle's work show back up in the West that he writes. I mean, in an insane amount of words, like 10 or 15 million words, and he died when he was in his 40s or something like that. He apparently would. It's like four or five scribes, and he would be like, give this guy a paragraph, and then turn the next guy and give him a paragraph for a different thing he was working on, then turn the third guy, and so he'd have like 5 things he was working on all at once. If you've seen like Magnus Carlsen playing chess with 15 people at the same time, he's doing that with theology.
Do you know, that's a great tactic for somebody who's got that much going on in their mind that simplifies it incredibly.
Yeah. So he's, and the Catholic Church has picked him up. They're like, look, if you want to understand the world, probably just look at St. Thomas. And like, there's plenty of people in the church that have critiqued him and disagree with him on whatever. But Daniel Thoma's point, the guy who wrote this book, is this framework that we see at maybe its highest point in St. Thomas Aquinas, but you find all over the place, is the way that we should be interpreting science. And so one of the things is that there are 4 causes to beings. There's an efficient cause, a material cause, a formal cause, and a final cause. And so we think of things as their material cause. What are they made out of, right? So it's like, oh, I'm whatever percent oxygen, whatever percent hydrogen, whatever percent carbon, and so on. That's that's actually not even the material cause. But there's obviously, if you took me in a meat grinder and blended me up and dumped me out on the floor, I would not be Ted anymore, right? Well, materially nothing changed, right? It's still the same material, but the pattern is gone, right? That's something like the formal cause. Okay, so we are what they call that hylomorphic being, which means that you're made out of matter and form. That's all it means, matter and form. So what's weird is when we went to this whole materialistic thing, then we split our brains off into this other world so that we think that all this communication is happening outside of the material. And it's totally obviously not. Mark's language is something like, what is it that you have the ethereal, right?
The ethereal and the material. Yeah.
And the material, it's actually the material by which the ethereal communicates. If you like, it's like the way that we speak to each other is through the fact that we're embodied. And so, I mean, literally down to the level of like, how do my sound waves get to you? How do you receive them? All this stuff, right? It's tied up. Why else would it matter if you severed the optical nerve in someone's head? Like, okay. But what that means is that this happens on all sorts of levels. So when you're sitting in this group, when I think, right, what were you saying, Mark? Something like judgment and action, judgment and action.
Discernment, judgment, action.
Okay, these all go together, right? So when I think something, I don't know if I could not move a little bit, right? It's like I'm so tied up together. So I'm sitting there in this Bible study, and right? We say something hits me, right? I kind of respond like someone like threw a little pebble at me or something. And you can see that because we're hylomorphic beings. And so you can all this stuff is happening on both levels at once because we are composite creatures. We're not just material and we're not just formal causes. We're both of them at the same time, completely and utterly. And so to the point that Christian doctrine says that when your spirit leaves your body, that at some point it's so important that you're a hylomorphic creature that God will break the universe apart and put your body and soul back together, right? It's like, it's that important. When we say the resurrection of the body, that's what we mean. It's that important.
I have never heard that before.
Yeah, that's what it's crazy stuff, but like that's what they were talking about back then. So I love that. So when you're seeing on a very practical, now it works one way in terms of detecting things, it works the other way in terms of directing. So even if people aren't aware of it, you can adjust your body. You've changed your position and all this stuff, and all of a sudden now everyone's attention is directed in this other way that they weren't before. And this is Gnosticism. Sandy, to go back to our discussion about Gnosticism, one way to understand Gnosticism is it's an attempt to split those two, to deny the good of materiality and take the immaterial, the form, and say, this is the only thing that's good. Your form is imprisoned by your materiality. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the constraint of materiality that is the bad God that you have to get past.
That's the idea of Gnosticism. So what's great is that with
thinking out loud, why would they come to that conclusion? Is it because they think that
it's phenomenologically obvious and correct that constraint comes from the material. Yeah, it's not the only constraint, but it's the constraint that's most known to us. It's like, why can't I run as fast as Usain Bolt? Well, that's a material constraint. Like, well, why should that be there? Who put us in this material body? Whoever did that, they're the bad guy. Clearly. Yeah, well, that's absolutely true.
That's where the pain's coming from, right? It's like, that's where you get hurt. Like, it's pain, limitation, age, all these things, hangovers. It's like, I don't want my body. Why would I want my body? I want, and you see us coming back to this over and over, like the Romantics, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in the late 1800s, again, where we're hitting the same thing, and the spiritualism of the early 1900s, on and on and on. So what I love is that this Mary Harrington points out, and I love this about her, that she connects our enchantment with the digital and Gnosticism, because the digital feels disembodied. Now, here's what's great. Back in 2014,
I may ask you to repeat this. I have a one-word answer, and my brain is tracking, going, just type the darned answer to somebody. Previous conversation, young girl at work. I'm recommending an author she read on marriage and relationships.
Are you sharing something? Do you want me to stop? I didn't pick up on that exactly.
You're good to keep talking. I'm just apologizing for splitting my attention momentarily.
So Bitcoin, right? Because there's this whole idea now we're getting away from physicality and materiality. Bitcoin, back in, I think it was 2015, it may have been 2014, was consuming more electricity than the nation of Afghanistan.
Yes, I think I heard that.
You're like, you can't get away from materiality. Like, you can stretch it a little bit. You can feel like you're further away. Maybe you can hide the things, right? Like, you think about like Amazon drone services, like all of this, there's this whole movement towards, you want this instantaneous link between the will and the manifestation of things. And you want to forget that there's a whole material reality behind that. And it never works. Yeah. It never works. It always gets you again. And so, we have to, even while we're doing stuff like this, have to be aware of the fact that, like, it's not magic in the sense that we have, ascended into the ethereal realm. Like, we're still internet cables, still bodies, still lungs, still speakers, still microphones. We haven't gotten away from that. But it's also wonderful. Like, again, as a Christian, like, and it's not just Christians that say this, but like, as a Christian, like, I absolutely have to affirm, like, created reality is good. It is. And that includes materiality. We're not trying to get away from it. We're trying to redeem it. Right?
Yes.
Very, very different things.
That's the important part, is the trying to redeem it, right? Because you have to believe there's a way to redeem it, and you've got to redeem it outside of itself. And that's where the ethereality, the re-enchantment happens. And look, this whole thing and all the stuff you were talking about, this has been my frustration this week, is people are still stuck on all this. And I'm like, guys, we actually have answers to, like, this is all answered. Like, I don't even understand why you're, the Vanderklay video that came out yesterday, I think it was, the precursor to the Spencer Clavin Washington, D.C. event there. They're all struggling with that. And I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Like, how have you lived this long in your lives? And I mean, like, you get to the age of like 25 and you haven't figured this out. But like, and all that stuff has been figured out. Like, actually, may not be satisfying, or we'll say scientifically satisfying answers. But like, yeah, to your point, like,
so
Thomas,
weird question. I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to. There may be answers that you're purporting exist, but if I haven't seen it and I haven't encountered them, then it hasn't connected. Therefore, there is no answer
for you,
right? But they're also not seeking it. Like, yeah, and I keep telling the Protestants this. Like, a lot of these big breakthroughs you guys come to me with in your 30s and 40s and 50s are like 8-year-olds know this from Sunday school in the Catholic Church. Like, I'm sorry, it just is what it is. I'm sorry. It just
Mark,
is what it
we
is.
can't do tradition.
Right. It can't. Right. Well, right. And it's taught. The propositions are taught in a way that's embedded in tradition. So the propositions are sufficient. If you just give somebody those propositions, they now need the participatory proof, and it's not there in unless you have the traditions and the traditions that last. It can't be a tradition you thought up yesterday.
Well, that's not a tradition. Like, it's literally not a tradition. Right. So there's a oh my goodness, there's just so much stuff. Sandy, I want to come back to something you said, which was about movement and about vibration. And I think this just would probably get some things firing in your head. So Daniel Toma brings up what's called the hierarchy of being. And people generally, when they think of the hierarchy of being, they have some sort of like weird Darwinianism in there, where they're like more complicated and powerful is at the top of the hierarchy, and less complicated and less powerful is at the bottom of the hierarchy. Okay. Toma says, no, totally off base. It is about movement, and it is about, and he says movement in the broadest sense. So in Aquinas, when he talks about movement, he thinks about things like change, biochemical changes, internal changes, intellection, the use of your intellect. That's a kind of movement. So the angels, they're bodiless spirits, but they move because they're intellects. They have intellects and wills, and so there's movement. And what he sees as what Aquinas saw as the thread that goes all the way through reality is an increasing degree of interiority of movement. What does that mean? It means how self-directed is that movement. So, right, we have this comment right here. Rocks are based.
Can you rotate back through that for me again?
Yeah, I'm gonna work back through it. He says rocks don't know that they're rocks. Right. Mm-hmm. So at the bottom of the hierarchy of being, in the Aristotelian Thomistic view, you have what they called minerals, but we'd call non-living things, right? Which is so interesting. We don't have a word for it except to reference life.
Seriously?
We
call them non-living things.
Yeah. Right. It's like we have being and non-being, and we have living and non-living. It's like, what's our point of reference? Living beings. Like, just sit with that one for a while. Okay, so rocks, things like rocks and black holes and whatever, and atom bombs, they sit there until something does something to them. They can move, but they're governed by the laws of physics. So like Newton's 3 laws, or depending on your reference frame, special relativity or whatever.
I would say constrained, because governed means there's more agency, or there's an agency over them. But actually,
Mark, I want to argue that they don't do things until something happens to them. It's action reaction. But then you get to the most basic life, and all of a sudden it's doing things. It's actually doing things. And so then he traces that from basically assimilation, growth, and reproduction in plants, which what's cool is you're like, okay, that's a category. So it doesn't actually matter genetically or evolution in terms of your evolutionary heritage, where those things are coming from. If those are your capacities, that's like in the hierarchy of being your plant. And then you have being able to sense and have memory and respond. So then you have animal life. And then he draws a big line through to through intellection, what they called reason, and they had a much richer idea of reason than we do now. Just like, I'm just going to throw that out there. Reason is something completely different than what we consider now. Reason and intellect. And the difference is, if you can see how that movement is becoming more and more interior. Oh, I've got people wanting links. Hold on a second.
People want to talk. You're getting them excited.
Oh, goodness. It's better that than shouting me down. Okay, but what about the fringe of a garment? Thanks, Chad. Come on in. So when I can look, an animal, a plant can do certain things depending on what the weather and the conditions are afforded to it where it was planted, where it started growing. But an animal can decide to get up and move and do stuff, right? There's this hold, and it can manipulate its environment in all kinds of crazy ways. But then when you get to a person, and I don't know what's going on in animals' heads, but I do know that people are able to sit there, and I can go to Africa in my head. I can go to Mark's living room in my head. I can go to Narnia in my head, right? So you can see how, like, I need less and less of something impinging on me to act. And this is, so the line, so you're asking about movement, right? And Thoma's idea, pulling just from Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, is that as you move up the hierarchy of being, that capacity to move in self-movement becomes increasingly capable. But we're not angels, we're people. And so there's this really tight reciprocal relationship between our body and our intellect. And that's why you can sit in the Bible study, or you can translate with your hands, and all this stuff is happening because you're a holomorphic being. You're a soul and a body combined together. Hello, Chad.
Hello.
Hello.
My wife told me that when people come on, I have to stop talking. So, and welcome them.
Don't stop on my account.
Yeah.
I barely know what's being said. I just was hearing something about, I thought I heard something about inanimate objects not having agency or something like this.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And then
I talk about the living and the non-living. We don't talk. We don't have a category other than non-living.
Right.
Well, what about the garments?
What about garments?
Yeah, I mean, like, so you have the fringe of the garment that he wore, where he's like, "Who touched me?" But it wasn't him. She just touched the fringe of his garment, and then in the transfigured thing, all of his robes and everything were like transfigured.
Well, so that's that. Look, self interior movement is not the same thing as like a virtue or a capacity or a power, right? So, like, an atomic bomb has tremendous capacity to transform the world around. Far more capacity to transform the world than I do in my physicality. But it's just going to sit there till someone presses the button. And so, so I would look at something like the relics as a similar thing, where it's like they've been infused with a virtue because of the sanctity of the person that either owned them or it made up their body, but they don't, except apart from miracles, right? And there are miracles. There's a reason it's like a miracle if a rock floats, right? Because rocks. By the way, one of my favorite lines in all of English comes from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at the very beginning, when it says the alien spaceships show up on Earth, and it says they hung there in the sky exactly the way that bricks don't.
I love it.
Douglas Adams is fantastic at that.
It's just, you want poetry and you want good writing. Like that sentence right there. You can just sit with that one. So, but exactly the way that bricks don't. It's like, but you can then pick up a brick and kill someone with it or build a cathedral with it. And so it's not that the brick doesn't have great potency and
it doesn't have agency.
They need someone else to activate it.
Yeah. Yeah. How does that tickle you, Chad?
Well, it does. I've been inspired by just the way that the show The Chosen did the whole garment is the touch when he touched the or when
I liked how they did that episode.
Yeah, did the garment like reach out and grab her? Is that what?
No.
I haven't seen it. Oh, okay.
No.
no, but she's like, she believed that so I don't know, it must have been an old doctrine or something. Even
Yeah, if she touched him, she would make him unclean because she had the flow of blood that wouldn't stop. So she had to touch like specifically just his garment.
Yeah. And he didn't know that she touched until that she was going to until she did. I mean, that's the way it seemed.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was like, I don't know, it's just kind of powerful. Made me think about faith in a strange way. And then I was listening today to the story about Saint Maria Goretti.
Oh.
And there's a story of a man who was working in a building outside of Rome, and a block fell and crushed his foot completely, and he was going in to get it amputated the next day, and somebody prayed for him with invoking Maria Goretti, the saint, and then put one of these prayer cards by his foot, and then the next day or whatever it was, they opened it up. There's absolutely nothing wrong with his foot. He didn't even miss a day of work.
Oh, wow.
So I think about those things, and I believe that that's true. I don't believe that that's a gaslight or anything like that. And I just wonder how that kind of relates to this, because
that's the material constrains the ethereal, right? And that goes back to the Gnosticism, Ted, right? But it also because it constrains it. Another way of thinking about it is that it doesn't only constrain it, it also mediates it, which means it allows the ethereal to travel in a way it can't travel without the material. Whatever that means, it doesn't even matter what that means, right? There's a difference in kind between the ethereal, if you want to think about it in terms of Plato's quote realm of forms, which is eidos, is a better way to think about it. The perfect circle or the perfect triangle or the perfect square, there's only ever one. And it doesn't have a size, right? Whereas in the material, you can have as many triangles as you want, but none of them will ever be perfect. And so there's that trade-off there between the things that are in that realm, that ethereal or spiritual realm, versus the things that are in the realm where our body is, where we're constrained by our body. Our thoughts aren't, though, right, Ted? Because you can get into my living room with your thoughts, but it's much different matter to get into my living room with your body, because that requires all kinds of, and it takes more time, and like there's all kinds of mediation going on there from the material.
Yeah.
If Chad's asking about healing, then your answer makes sense to me.
Chad, I would take a tack.
I want to know what Chad's asking.
Much more along the lines of what the Catholic Church talks about in terms of sacraments, which is essentially that there are these physical aspects of reality that become objective, real vehicles of grace, supernatural grace. And so such that you can go to this place at this particular time, and there'll be a piece of bread made from flour, and theoretically you can trace that all the way back to the plant that it grew out of. But if you eat that at a certain time in a certain way, you've eaten God.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. Here's a really
boy, let's get him on into the
I want to share a weird story. So my wife
stories. Okay.
My wife and I this weekend went to go meet with some family. One of our her uncles decided to refuse any more chemo work or anything. And so he's being very courageous, and I don't know, it probably isn't going to work out. But we talked to them, and it's very, very powerful. So we go there. It's over near Minnesota. So we go. She's like, "Hey, do you want to go to this? The what do they call that? A basilica, the first basilica in America. It's in Minnesota." And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great."
Oh, that's cool.
So we went to the service this morning at 7. So we park, and we get out and we're walking, and it's in a gas neighborhood. Oh, dude, this is shady as hell. But all of a sudden, it was the craziest thing. Like a huge chunk of asphalt just came flying at us and landed at our feet. We have no idea where it came from. like we're looking around like, where the hell did this come from? And there's literally no place there's nobody throwing this. It was very, very, very weird. And so then we go in. She's like, I want to go into the front because the proper way to do this is to enter at the front of the building. So we go in and it's really beautiful. And the dude, the usher, is like, hey, I was wondering if you and your wife here could offer up the gifts, after and I was like, my wife's like, yeah, but we're not Catholics in good standing. Is that okay? He's like, oh, it's completely fine. And we're just like, okay. So we're at the 7 o'clock mass, 7 a.m. mass, and we have to bring the offering. We have to carry up the Eucharist, dude. Like, what is that? It was like it was real honor. I mean, it was like powerful, but but we didn't take the Eucharist either because we're not Catholics in good standing. So that was a very strange thing. The whole thing was so strange. But thinking about you people and the time I've spent with you guys and just like this life that I live now, these things mean something. I don't know what that means, but it meant something powerful. And yeah, somebody could say, what's the big deal? All you did was carry up some wine and some bread up to the front. You just walked 100 yards past everybody in that church.
Look, yeah, but that's the redemption of the material from.
Yeah, Chad, that you just did blank. That just is the just that's destroying the world and the reason the meaning crisis exists.
Right.
Yep.
Like that's the just that you just kill it. Just kill it as fast as you can.
Yeah, because I believe that it was just a just.
Yeah, yeah. Man, well, the nice thing is I've actually been spending a lot of time thinking about stories recently and the book of Job. And like the nice thing is that you don't have to decide what it means yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can just live with it.
Yeah.
You can decide you don't know or that you don't know the whole story and be okay in the uncertainty. And that's what we're not okay with anymore in the modernistic, materialistic world. We're not okay with uncertainty.
Well, one of the things that was very apparent to me, at least, was it felt so appropriate because my wife and I really believe ourselves to be servants. So that was a big piece of that. Because I didn't know what that part of the liturgy meant because we don't really have that in our church. Yeah, and I don't know. It was very powerful. The whole thing of standing there doing in the mass. Just like kind of like, getting a little teary-eyed just in general because the whole thing was just kind of powerful. It's the first time I'd ever been to a Catholic mass. So it was something, man. But yeah, I mean,
there's this whole beautiful thing. So that part's called the offertory for the reasons that it's involved in the offering. And there's this really wonderful thing. And I'm not as familiar with that. We go to a traditional parish, so I'm not as familiar with the new rite there, so I don't really know how much it comes through. It's very clear that like there's this whole, it's almost like a joke. Like you could almost call it a joke because all these prayers are, God, you gave us this thing and we're giving it right back to you. Like you gave us the bread and the wine and we're going to give it back to you. And then because we gave it up to you, now you're going to take it from something that we already didn't deserve, but is a material blessing into the ineffable, utterly transcendent and incomprehensible blessing of God himself. Right. And then what do we do with that? We give that back to God. And so there's this like thing of God gives us the stuff that we don't deserve. And we're like, okay, no, take it back, God. Like you need to take this because it's too much of a gift. And he says, okay, well, in response to that, I'm only going to give you more. And then we're like, okay. And so there's the joke about the offertory is it's like, what are we giving God that he hasn't given us? It's really, it's beautiful. Yeah,
we felt very appropriate, like we were like almost like waiters or something because like we didn't eat any of it or drink because I didn't feel like it would be appropriate, and we could have totally did it and gotten away with it, right? But it was like
Define gotten away with it.
The Orthodox will check. You can't get away with it in an Orthodox church. Catholics, they don't check.
But like the strange thing is, I read up on the gift, the taking of the gifts, and typically in the liturgy, they ask a family that's in the parish, and they're supposed to represent that parish.
Yeah.
And
I don't know.
What is going on?
maybe the future's pulling you towards itself, Chad. I don't know what to say.
I'm surprised we're not Catholic.
Oh man, no, it's really wonderful. The whole notion of Gnosticism, and this sort of splitting off, that because you can also see the connection between Gnosticism and sort of the Cartesian dualism and all this stuff. Like all of that just gets totally blasted when you look at the Eucharist, right? Like you can't be a Gnostic, you can't be a dualist, you can't any of this stuff. Like the Eucharist is, I mean, from where I sit, like the Eucharist is actually the point of union of all of creation. Like that's where it all comes together, and it recapitulates what happens on the cross. And so that's it. You're looking into the utter union of reality when you look at the Eucharist. That's how I understand it. And the absurdity is, so Sandy, you'd like this. We were talking about the beauty of things eating you, right? There's this professor that I really love, Dr. David Fagerberg, he's retired now, but he has a book called Liturgical Aestheticism, and I've listened to 5 or 6 talks on it. And he references a theologian that he came across that said there's four eatings involved. There is what is it? The God eats the man eats the God and the man eat together, and I can't remember what the last one is. But he's like, I can see most of those. Like I can see the man eats the God, that's the Eucharist, the God and the man eat together, the sacrificial meal. It's like, I don't get the God eats the man. He said, until I was I brought my kids inside after a long day out in the yard, and we got them all cleaned up and they're in their pajamas. And like, I looked at him and I was like, I love you so much, I could just eat you up. He's like, that's not good. And he quotes,
what about Jonah?
He quotes this line from C.S. Lewis from the. What was that, Chad?
What about Jonah getting eaten by the? Is that God eating man?
I don't know, man. That's a good question.
That is a good question.
He quotes C.S. Lewis though, and the Horse and His Boy, where when she sees Aslan, she comes up to him and she says, "Please, sir, I'd rather be eaten by you than served by anyone else." Yeah, there's some depths of reality going on there. Yeah.
Is that my microphone party?
I gotta get some more water.
I think my microphone is going crazy. Anyways, I'm just grateful we didn't get hit by that falling asphalt stone, which was very strange.
Yeah, that's a wild chain of events.
Those demons will come after you, Chad. Seriously, I've almost been run off the road in a situation like that. I was going to have a conversation with someone that really had to happen, and we're doing 65 on a 2-lane, both directions, and a truck ran me off the road, and then he drove off the road. And it was like, I called my wife and I said, "This just happened to me. I really, she goes, if something else like that happens, you need to turn around and come home." I said, "If something else like this happens, I really need to go where I'm going."
Nice. Interpretation of everything.
Everybody, I gotta hop off. My phone's acting wacko.
All right.
Great.
Bye. Good to see you, Chad.
Thanks for the story.
You too. God bless.
Yeah, you talked about that in the Paralandra talk. I liked that part. I really just liked the whole talk. I don't know if I had anything specific I actually wanted to ask about. I think Paralandra especially, but the Ransom trilogy in general was like a really formative influence on me as a teenager.
Yeah.
And I'm just really happy that other people are talking about it.
Oh, it's so much fun. It's so much fun. That was like the thing that I was always trying to get people to read. And then, when people in this little corner started talking about it, I was like, wow, the moment has come. I've been training for this moment my whole life.
Because it was Christmas break. I want to say my freshman or sophomore year of high school, I got a Kindle. and my dad had already bought the whole Ransom trilogy on Kindle, and I tore through it in literally like 3 days.
Wait, Emma, what year did you get the Kindle? Sophomore year of high school?
High school. So
Yes.
2014?
Yeah.
2015?
Yeah.
Not 2015. I graduated high school in 2016. So like 13, 14.
Yeah. Those Kindles in high school. I got one for Christmas. I think the same grade as you. And what I did is I immediately went to Project Gutenberg and downloaded all of the Jules Verne novels that the library didn't have and proceeded to read all of them.
Nice.
For very obvious reasons, once you get into them, are not popular. Yo, Jules Verne, that guy was crazy. He has one called, so one of my favorite interactions I ever had in college was I've got my Kindle and I'm reading it. And I was reading, I think it's called 800 Leagues on the Amazon. Okay. So this person that this young lady who I sort of knew, like, it ends up behind me in the line, I think at the cafeteria. She's like, "What are you reading?" I said, 800 Leagues on the Amazon by Jules Verne. She goes, "Oh, you mean 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne." I was like, "What do you mean? No, you mean."
Because no one knows he wrote more than like
2 stories.
The 2 or 3 books. Yeah.
But here's the bonkers part about that one. So the first part is
Around the World in 80 Days also Jules Verne?
Yep. Yeah.
So then everybody knows 3 books that he wrote.
He also wrote one where these like guys from the American Revolution build a gigantic gun and they like shoot themselves to the moon, and he thinks that they have like some like compression pads that break when it launches it, and apparently that's going to deal with the fact that they undergo something like 150,000 G's. They're like, look, it like crushes a little bit, so they're fine. There's another one where an asteroid comes and like scrapes part of a town onto it as it's passing Earth, and so everyone wakes up on the asteroid the next day, and they can't figure out what's going on because gravity is like a quarter of what it should be. I'm like, any rate, so
I love it.
800 Leagues on the Amazon. The first half of it's like a Jules Verne adventure where they're all going down the Amazon on this giant log raft they've made, and then the second half of it turns into this in-depth discussion of cipherology, where they've like find this piece of paper in the Amazon and they're trying to like crack a cipher, and it's like basically a narrative cipher textbook. Like,
I love it.
I see why they don't make kids read this one in high school. Yeah. So any rate, so yeah, those ended up being what? Well, okay. So what was it that like grabbed your attention with those at that time? 2016. Yeah. What was it that got you?
I don't know. Lewis in general very much gives me that feeling of like there's something so big here that I cannot put into words at all. So I had that feeling reading Perelandra. I had that feeling reading Till We Have Faces. That hideous strength terrified me, but I couldn't put it down.
Yeah. And now you're living it. So there you go. How does that make you feel?
Not good. Not great.
It's interesting. It's I would not be surprised to see the more explicit influences of the angelic powers, but it is what it is.
Ted, is it the case that you imbibed all this stuff and it had something for you, but until you kind of had your awakening or whatever you want to call it, and really got into church, did the flavor change? Is that what happened, or
with like Jules Verne and stuff?
Well, with all of it, yeah.
With all of it, yeah. So it's funny. I don't know how much this came across. I was trying to get this across in my first conversation with Karen on her channel. I basically just like had 2 things running in parallel, and so like I grew up in a Protestant church, and like I was baptized in a river in Arkansas when I was like 6 years old. I mean, it's like by my dad with my brother. I mean, like we're like non-denominational Protestants, like just making it work out here. In the church my grandfather and grandmother helped start. There's like 40 people there, and it wasn't. And so I had a couple of places where in high school I had a really weird high school experience coming out of being homeschooled, and then I had another experience in college, which was mostly, let's say, the result of my pride. So the short version is I went to a boarding school for the last 2 years of high school. It was like, if you can think of like the sort of like woke scientism, like the woke scientism that dominates so much of the world now, like that was my high school back then it was like, it's just a bunch of loony teenagers. So like, it's a bit of a crisis for me, but it didn't feel like that big of a deal. And then I got out into the, 10 years later, it's like, oh no, this is just my high school everywhere. It's but I made it through that. And like, it was really, as contrast, Mark, right? Like I come out of this very healthy, like people might have looked at us and said we're fundamentalists, but like we read all kinds of stuff, we talked about all kinds of stuff. We didn't have like a lot of exposure to other people. That's what we didn't have. So then I went into this high school and it was like, I had a teacher who I loved, and I had him for like 3 hours every day, but he was like UC Berkeley sort of California Buddhist LSD kind of guy who would spend like half of class or more telling all of us how like the Christian church was the worst thing that had happened to the world and all this stuff. I mean, I love the guy. He taught me a bunch of really wonderful stuff, but like, boy, it was all on the table, on the chopping block every single day. And but I made it through that. And I had a really interesting friendship. There's these sort of residential mentors there because it's a boarding school and we didn't know how to manage ourselves. So they had to hire people to be our moms basically. And this one guy had just gotten back from 2 years in Israel, University of Israel U, whatever, one of the big universities in Jerusalem, doing a master's in religious history. And he and I hit it off really, really well. He was there my senior year. And he basically was like, the reason that I know how to have good conversations with people and like know how to think through stuff is basically because of Will. Like he was great. We would like, what we did for fun was we'd like sit down and like, we'd just like take opposite positions on something and then hash it out for 3 hours. It was to the point that like when other people saw us doing that, they thought that we weren't going to be friends. They're like worried, or like, are you and Will still friends after this? I don't know. But like, we just learned how to, one of the things is like, it helped me like not be, upset with people in conversations. So I came out of that being just
really
like
useful.
A cocky son of a to this university from a state university, but like it felt like a Bible school after that. Honestly, like you go out on Tuesday night and there's like, you'll see 60 signs up for various campus ministries and people are walking around with Bibles and talking about all this stuff. Like it really felt like I was going to a Bible school, and I was like, dude, I know way more than these punks because I climbed out of the throat of hell when I was in high school.
Right.
But then I didn't have the frame for all this stuff, and so I was like, I'll read some Richard Dawkins. Yeah, that messed me up because I didn't realize what he was doing. I didn't realize what he was doing at all. I was living in Dawkins' playing field.
Yep.
And so when that happened, what saved me from that was G.K. Chesterton's orthodoxy. Honestly, like you can it's a fascinating. It's like Richard Dawkins and Chesterton's orthodoxy fighting over my soul my freshman year of college.
Yes.
And so,
how do you find a universe where this actually happens to you so easily as you're saying? Because I'm trying to think of people that I know around here that's like, this is not how things work. They wouldn't have even heard of half these people.
Sandy, I don't know what to tell you. I've had so many crazy things happen in my life. Like my in-laws, I scare my in-laws sometimes. My mother-in-law says that I'm like a vortex for things. She doesn't think it's my fault. She just like stuff happens to you. I'm gonna sidetrack because I need to tell this story because just so you guys understand like the kind of stuff that happens to me. I had pigs for a long time because I love like small scale agriculture, and I had them for about 9 months, and we had our first daughter. And when I was staying at my family's house. My parents live in the same town. They've got the big old house that we grew up in. So we're staying with them while we're recuperating from bringing this baby home. And a black bear at midnight, when my daughter's 4 days old, comes and starts eating my piglets. So I don't know what's going on. My wife's got super hearing because she's just had this baby, and so all of her senses are like at 14. And she's like, Ted, I think there's something wrong with the piglet. So I run outside. I get locked out of the house. I run down to the piglet pen, and I think that's the nastiest looking dog I've seen in my entire life. That's my first thought. Okay. But then the dog stands up on its hind legs, which is a really bad. And it's a bear. And I've got all of my paternal instincts going on, right? I'm like, I'm a person, but I'm also an animal. So like, dude, I'm just like pumping with paternity right now. And so I lost my mind. I thought, okay, I got to wake someone else up and not go after this bear. So I run around, but the doors are all locked, so I can't get back in the house. And so I start pounding on my parents' window. And the next thing that I remember is I've run back into the front yard. I've got a garden hoe, and I'm face to face with a black bear. My parents had more sense than me. They got in both of the cars and like drove, turned all the headlights on or honking. But I had hit the bear on the nose with a garden hoe by the time they got there.
How are you alive?
That's amazing.
I know, Mark.
How are you alive?
So there's like lightning in the it's like stars overhead, but there's just like this huge thunderstorm. It's in the summertime. This huge thunderstorm out in the distance. There's just like lightning, and we end up like we're like, okay, we've got all these dead pigs on the ground. The bear's gonna come back. What are we gonna do? The neighbor comes with his 20 gauge, and like me and my dad like drive off. I'm in the back of his pickup truck with a headlamp and a shotgun and a barrel full of dead pigs to get rid of them. I'm like, how did I get here? So the next day, we all wake up the next morning at like, way later than we usually do. And it's like, we're all kind of like, that was the weirdest dream we've ever had, but I guess it was real. And I looked at my mother and I was like, at least it was just like a little, a yearling, because it would have been really bad if it was a big bear. And my mom goes, Ted, that bear was looking you eye to eye when we got out there. I said, no. The bear was not big. It was twice as tall as the pig pen when it was standing up. That fence is like, it's a little fence. It's like 2 feet tall. And I went outside and it's like, I remember seeing how tall that fence was and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was like, that was a big bear. So we called the Game and Fish Commission, and I go, I didn't know what the next thing to do is. This bear just came and ate our pigs. And he goes, are you sure it was a bear? I was like, yes, sir. I'm sure it was a bear. He goes, are you sure it was eating the pigs? I was like, yeah, I heard the bones. Like, I heard the bones. Like, I'm sure it was eating the pig. He go, okay, I'll come on over. So he gets out there with a bear trap, which is this giant piece of culvert. It's a live trap with a giant culvert that they bait with sardines that he picked up at Walmart. Apparently they had like only cayenne sardines or something that day. So that's what he got. And he looks at it. He's like, whoa, wow. He's like, I've been working in this field for 8 years and I've never seen a bear do this before. I'm like, great. That makes me feel really good. So we put the bear trap out. And he's like, we'll leave it here for a week. And if it doesn't get anything, we'll come back and pick it up. So he drops it off on a Friday. And, I don't sleep that much. No, it's not the baby that makes me not sleep that much. But we make it through a week. Nothing's happened to the pigs. And he comes and he picks the trailer up on Friday. And I go over to my parents the next day to take care of the pigs. And the bear has broken into the barn, ripped the fence open, killed a 150-pound pig, dragged it out into the woods, and halfway buried it.
What the heck?
Yeah, so we call the Game and Fish Commission again, and this time all the bear guys come out. There's all 3 bear guys from this area, and then we've got this grizzled old man. He looks at me and he goes, I've been working with bears in this area for 34 years, and I've never seen a bear do this before. I'm like, this is not making me feel good, guys. So that night, I go to we find, because obviously at this point, he looks at the barn too. He's like, yeah, if the bear wants to get your pigs, he's just going to rip the walls off the barn. Like, that barn's not that strong. So we find someone who's got this old livestock trailer that we can put the pigs in at night. And we get that over there. I go to Walmart and I buy, because we didn't have a gun at that point, I bought a 12-gauge shotgun, double-aught buckshot. And
right, because you can just do that at Walmart.
You can. Welcome to Arkansas. I mean, the whole story of me trying to buy the gun from the game counter, that's another story. But I bought the shotgun, the buckshot, and the baby monitor. I'm like, I bought it all on my credit cards. I'm probably on the FBI watch list at this point, because who buys that stuff?
I'm wanting to see the look on the face of the cashier
I
cashing
don't
it.
know, man. It's Arkansas. I doubt you were the only person with that purchase list that weekend.
So we get the pigs in the trailer. We get the baby monitor set up, and my dad and I stay up until like 4 a.m. And about every 45 minutes, one of the pigs like rolls over and starts squealing at another one. So we like get the gun out and run out with our headlamps, and it's like nothing. So we like turn in at 3:30 a.m. So the next day we go out, which is Saturday. I can't even remember how this works. Yeah, that was Friday night, or any rate, let's say that was Friday night because the times all work out. But anyway, Saturday morning, we go out there and the pig that was buried in the woods is gone. Like gone. There's not even a trail where it dragged it. Like that bear probably picked the pig up and left with it. So we're like, okay, crap, the bear's still around. So it's like, this is definitely 100% not over. So that night, we get over there kind of late. Judith's like, I don't want to stay. She's like, I don't want to stay by myself again. So I'm going to come with you. So we get there. It's like dusk is falling. we're going to try to get the baby monitor closer to this trailer. So my dad goes around behind the house to get an extension cord. And he calls me on my cell phone. He's like, the bear is behind the house right now. And so like, I grew up playing airsoft with my brother and my cousin at night. And so we'd like run around with our airsoft guns around the house at dusk in the summer and with our headlamps. And it was like, yeah, except this time it's not my cousin. It's a black bear and it's a shotgun instead of an airsoft gun. So I get there. It's like, at this point, it's completely dark. I can't see anything. It's like, crap, the bear's gone. So we start looking around in the brush. And just for reference, I'd never shot an animal before in my entire life before this. So, you know, everyone in Arkansas grows up hunting. I didn't grow up hunting. Like, this is the first time I'd shot an animal. I'd shot skeet and I'd shot target practice, but I'd never shot an animal before. And I look over and there's eye shine. And I just unloaded the shotgun into the woods, pull my hearing protection off, and we just hear this like, from the woods. It's like, okay, so the bear's not dead. So I had to go down in the woods with my headlamp, which if you've ever walked around in the woods with a headlamp on, you know your visibility is like 12 feet. And when you've got a shotgun, you're like, yeah, if that bear's just mad, because I had no idea where, I couldn't see it. I just saw eye shine and shot at it. So I'm heart's absolutely pounding, and I'm like working my way, and you know, all in the woods. It's like, oh yeah, I know the woods behind my house, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of really big rocks and a lot of really big trees. There's a lot. So I'm working my way through, and there's this big old rock that me and my brother would play on all the time growing up, and I come up behind it, and there, wedged in the crevice under that rock, is the dead black bear. And it was a perfect. I mean, it was like a right through all the vital organs. It was like one shot. It took me and 2 Game and Fish Commission guys to drag that thing out of the woods. It was so big.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, these are like.
I'm timestamping this and sending it to Colin.
This kind of stuff just happens to me. Like, I don't understand. How many people have pigs in Arkansas? Like, come on.
All right. New rules. From now on, if you're physically going to be anywhere, I need to know ahead of time because I don't want to be anywhere near you. You are bad luck,
this is a bad time. Mark, this is a bad time then to bring up that we're having this little corner thing in November, I guess.
What? Wait, where, when, what?
Yeah,
here in Arkansas, November 17th and 18th. We're gonna have the registration up this week. So
okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to the one in DC, so I gotta see if I can make it.
It's gonna be
I
smaller.
wonder if I can make it.
It's gonna be smaller. Yeah. Figure out
Arkansas is actually like next to Illinois, and I always forget this.
Yeah, you could drive here in a day. So yeah, we'll have that stuff up. But yes, Mark, do be careful. Maybe bring firearms if you're around me.
I'm gonna bring like crosses and blessed item, whatever.
I'll provide those, Mark. Don't worry, I've got all of those.
I don't trust yours, man. They don't work. You got bears.
No, this all happened before I was Catholic. Don't worry about it.
And William Branch, I like his comment, the real banjo stereotype. And Ted is the banjo man.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. At any rate, so Mark, I'm going to go back to your question, which was where did all this stuff, where did this stuff come together? And that was, I did my undergrad. I was in grad school, and then it was right like 2016. I spent some time in South America, came back. I was going to go back to grad school. And we just gotten married. And so also William asked about the army of feral wild boars. What's hilarious is like there's a county south of me where they'll kill 1,000 of them in a year or something like that. And I've seen them one time in my entire life. I don't know. The boars they just stay away. Maybe they stay away from me because they've heard stories. I don't know.
Maybe they're just specifically cursed with respect to pork, like pig.
Oh my goodness! I would eat them. Like, I would totally eat them. So they should probably be aware of that. But
they heard stories about what happened to your pigs, and they're like, "I'm not touching that one."
Oh my goodness! Yeah.
Well, you're a protector of pigs and a killer of evil bears. You get both stories going for you.
Oh my goodness! So yeah, so Mark, it was. I had these things where I had like this science world, and then I had this Christianity world, and I'm like, I couldn't make them fit together. Like I got that, like there's totally something above the material or something outside the material or something like that, and but I just like, I didn't have any tools to integrate them. So, I mean, it's funny what you're saying about these people coming to you in their 40s with these big insights. And I'm like, yeah, I hear that. And so it's actually the first really big break for me was spring of 2017 when someone sent me an article from Stephen Talbot on teleology and biology, right? So he's like this guy outside of academia, but he's brilliant, and he is basically writing about how in this article it's like if you actually look at how people talk about biology, it has purpose. Everything that's alive has purpose. It doesn't make any sense to talk about it except in terms of purpose. And I thought, okay, I feel like I've been swindled. Like no one told me this the whole time I was in school studying biology. Like, come on, man. And like proofreading, error checking, all this stuff. Even the word development implies something that you're on and on and on and on. Okay, so that was really great. And then I had some other things where I started to like see these things. Like my favorite example is the cow pasture, right? It's like there's cow pastures everywhere in Arkansas. It's like why are there cow pastures? There are cow pastures because of things that people believe and think. There aren't natural cow pastures. People believe that they should raise cows. People believe that we should eat beef. People believe that cow pastures are nice to look at. We've made laws where people get tax breaks if there's agricultural with agriculture exemptions, and on and on and on. It's all this non-real stuff that's totally affecting the real stuff that's this particular 40 acres somewhere in rural Arkansas. And I was like, oh, hold on. This is a lot more complicated than I was thinking, right? It's kind of like Wolfgang's vertical causality. It's like you can't explain the cow pasture unless you get outside of the material aspects of these things.
Right.
So those were those things that were starting to get me somewhere. And then so those are the chinks. Those are the chinks working their way in. And then in 2020, I got Daniel Toma for Christmas of 2019, and I read that. And then I found Pageau that same year, and then it was just like all this stuff just blew up.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Well, and betrayal's been a big theme this week with me for some reason. I've been just triggered left, right, and center. And then we're reading Plato's Republic, right? And book 7. Okay, we're finally at Plato's Cave, and then I realized, literally, actually, physically, for real, everybody that talks about Plato's Cave is lying to you in every possible worst way. And I was like, what? It's 4 sentences. It's at the beginning of the chapter, and the layout of the book. You have to understand the layout of the Republic. He starts with the most material example as a metaphor, and then immediately switches the metaphor and expands it, and then immediately switches the metaphor and expands it. And so all this stuff about going back down into the cave, none of that is in the book. 0 of that is in the book. It's not there. Plato didn't say any of that. I don't know what to tell you. It's 4 sentences or something. That's it. There's none of this going up and down. None of it. Yeah.
It is way shorter and less significant if you're reading the Republic without knowing how popular of a thing it is.
I don't know. I just like that Mumford & Sons song about the cave. So that's basically where I get all of my Plato is Mumford & Sons' first album.
Well, no, I mean, they talk about it, right?
Yeah.
That they immediately expand and change the metaphor up to and including an aisle. And there's all this other stuff going on that has nothing to do with the cave. They abandon the cave entirely. And they talk about returning to something like the prisoners.
Yeah.
But it's not clear what the prisoners, like how they're imprisoned, right? Because they can't move their heads. But obviously it can't be physically because that would damage them. And so, there's all this nuance in there. And because they do this in all the books are like this. They start out in the beginning with a metaphor and they immediately expand the metaphor, right? Because they're trying to show the limits of logical thinking, basically. But they're trying to expand everything out. So it's an enchantment. It's reciprocal opening, right? And then everybody pretends like Plato's cave is something that Plato said, and their classification about returning to the cave and all this it's not in the book. Plato doesn't say any of that.
This is like sorry. Go for
Socrates
it.
is actually the one who gives the cave example, right?
Yes.
Or is it okay? It's not one of his interlocutors.
No.
Because also, like, sometimes people will spout off things that someone else said as coming from Socrates. It's
Right.
like, this is important.
Well, but it's way worse because, you know, people use the cave as this individualistic way that you can come out of the cave and then you go back into the cave. And what is explicit in the text, and I do mean couldn't get any more clear.
No, you need to be let out of the cave.
Nope. None of that's in there. What is in there, though, is that if you go towards the good, right, which is, so we're way past the cave. The cave metaphor doesn't include the good, the bad. It doesn't include any abstractions. It's a material frame. But later on, they're talking about if the philosophers, basically, not the sophists, because those are the bad guys, right? If the philosophers were to move up towards the good, we shouldn't drag them back down. But Socrates says, no, we need to drag them down because they won't come down on their own, right? And so if you were going to fit that into the cave metaphor, it means, no, you're not strong enough to go out of the light and go back into the cave anyway. Because again, we've already expanded the metaphor out from the singular. The whole format of the Republic is about this singular individualist example getting expanded to what if there were one other person in the world, then getting expanded to a city. Like, that's the whole format of all the books. The cave is not about that part. The cave is literally just the materialistic single part where if you, as a single individual, if there were only a single individual, were constrained and you saw shadows on the wall, what would that look like? And
But
the whole part about coming out is the philosophers.
And how could you possibly know what the shadow was and what wasn't the shadow if you were the one person by yourself?
Right.
Really? Like, what are you going to compare it to?
And that's the whole point, is that you can't know by yourself. That's why that metaphor ends immediately. And all the metaphors do. They end instantly, and they instantly get expanded into abstractions because the sun gets likened to, the sun gets likened to the light of whatever, right? You know, goodness. They're talking about justice. There's no description of justice in the cave metaphor at all because it's just 4 lines, and they're not talking about justice. They're talking about constraint of the material realm.
So I'm gonna read some from this that I brought up in the conversation I had with Karen this week that I don't think you should put up yet, but I love this because it has a lot to do with what you're saying, and also I think like the best of this little corner. He says the ancient Greek and medieval philosophers viewed the task of philosophy as honing in on and drawing out the common human experience of reality. They saw an intimate connection between human life, moral judgments, and the nature of things. So I'm going to skip through some stuff that he says, and he goes on to say this. The experience of the average human being was the foundation of understanding upon which classical philosophy was built. It was the application of the rules of reason of this body of experience. Common human experience contained the truth in a hazy manner, and philosophy's purpose was to clarify it by the search for principles and causes. Philosophy refines and hones. It does not contradict common human insights. The common person and academic were of one mind and reciprocally dependent on each other. The philosopher needed common experience as the basis of thought, and the common man needed philosophy for the refinement and clarification of his thinking.
Well, and that's so in book 7, not in the metaphor of the cave, because it's not there, right? There's this concept that the philosophers move up towards goodness, right? And then they have to be dragged down by presumably, and it's explicit in the text, the creators of the city, who are Socrates and I think it's Glaucon at this point, right? We have to bring the philosophers back down. They don't come down on their own. It's not voluntary. And then the question is, well, who are we to do this? Well, it's a very fair question. And Socrates basically says they won't do it otherwise. But we need them to do it because they can now see things in the city at all the layers that the people at those layers can't see. There's the contrast again. In other words, in order for contrast to be useful, you have to go to the place of, we'll say, pure goodness or pure justice or whatever. And then you have to come out of that place. And then when you get out of that place, because you've seen something different, now you can adjust. And this is the job of the philosophers, to adjust the things at the lower level, because there are levels, right? But it's not one level. It's not you're in the cave, you're out of the cave. That's not in there. Sorry, right? And now you can adjust those things at the lower levels. That's actually what 7 says. It just doesn't use the cave to do it.
Do you think people smush together the cave and the divided line?
Yes. Well, everybody misunderstands the divided line. They totally misread that. I'm just like, this is pretty clear. How'd you guys get this so wrong? But they got it all wrong.
Okay. One request, 2 versions. Haven't read this. I'm reading it as you are speaking, and have no clue what the divided line is. Can I have both definitions, please?
The divided line is tough. You're supposed to take a rope and cut it into 4 parts, but they're not equal parts. They're each of a different size. And then you're supposed to lay that out. And the problem is the description of how to lay that out is not clear. And I suspect strongly that it's not in a line. It's actually vertical and horizontal, but I can't prove that because it's not clear in the text. And we couldn't make heads or tails of it either. But those different sizes are representative of different aspects of reality. And so it ends up looking a lot to me, and maybe this is my personal bias, like two of the pieces, they're not halves, 2 of the pieces are ethereal in nature, one more so than the other, and 2 are material in nature, one more so than the other. And that corresponds to the 4 types of information, probably not a coincidence.
So
and then,
is the cave and the out of the cave also representative of that divide of the ethereal and the material?
the cave is not.
Okay.
And that's what I'm objecting to. The cave is purely material, and it's meant to say, look, you're in it's a den or a cave. It sort of depends on the translation. You're in there. You can't move your head, right?
Well, that's why I'm asking. So that is the material.
Right. Well, but hold on. It says more than that. It says that what you're seeing is mediated by a fire that is behind you. Okay. So the whole description is third party. The whole description is third party. It has to be, right? And then you can't see anything. Now, if you were to leave, and they don't really describe that process at all, by the way, it's not in the book, right? Then you would know there was a difference between not in the den or the cave and in the cave. And you would know that the people in the cave, because all the people in the cave, because again, it's a small description, can only see the shadows on the wall.
I wondered about that because I was reflecting back on what you said earlier about the example of the blind man in Japan, and whether or not it does not say directly whether or not they have enough whatever to move their eyes, because if they can't move their head, how can they move their eyes? And if they can't move their eyes, how will they even see the shadows? And if they can't see the shadows,
they can see only the shadows. What they can't see is what's making the shadows, or the fact that they're shadows. They can't see that because they can't move their heads. So they're stuck. Their heads are stuck.
So they do have ability. The movement allowable. The movement to create the vision of the shadows is simply the eyes.
They can only look at the wall in front of them. That's what they're saying. Their perspective, right? The parable of the cave is that your perspective is limited to the wall in front of you by the constraint of your head. That's all it says.
With the medical example, you had said that it was only when the patient could move his head that,
right, because his eyes were moving, and then they
his eyes
to move.
So as long as your eyes can move, there's still movement, and you can therefore still see something.
Yeah, gotcha. That's the way you see right now, whether you realize it or not. Your fovea are vibrating, basically. You can only sense things through vibration and change. You can't sense things that don't change, don't register.
Makes sense.
Right. And so the cave is a very limited example to tell you that, materially speaking, if you if you wanted to squish the world into a material frame, which I don't recommend you do, and that is sort of the example of this is the entire Republic shows you why you can't do this. So it's ironic that all these materialists use it. Then what happens is your perspective is so limited that you can't properly be in right relationship with the world. That's basically what the parable says.
Man, Mark, you're making me think all kinds of stuff right now. So like,
Sorry.
no,
He's a really terrible person making him think all this stuff.
I am.
It's really great. It's really great stuff. I mean, like, you're like, okay, so if something doesn't change, how do you see it? And I was like, okay, so what do we always say about God, right? Who was and is to come, right? He is the unchanging one. And I think, okay, so why do we have such a hard time seeing God? It's like, well, because if you've never not seen him, right, and thank God you've never not seen him, then how would you know that you're seeing him? It's like, that's interesting. And so then I think, why is it that our attention, let's say, oh man, there's just so much there. I don't even know if I can start to unpack it. It's also 10 o'clock, so that makes it a little hard.
Well, and it's worse, Ted. Let me just add some salt on that wound I opened up. Right. How do you know about creation? You've never been outside of it.
Sure.
Can you see creation? Maybe part of it, but
yeah, I just
can't understand it.
I mean, this is to go back to Paralandra. This is the stuff that Lewis is like knocking on this door of how do you manage this stuff? I mean, if you read a preface to Paradise Lost, he's like specifically looking at Milton and saying that. So there's this notion of like, right, the whole problem of how do you have moral agents that don't know evil that are supposed to choose between evil and good, right? That's the problem in Genesis. How do you do that? And like he says. And Lewis seems to think that if you take it out of specifically the way it's presented in the biblical narrative, which is that it doesn't resolve that and it doesn't answer that question, do you end up having a fall before the fall, something that corrupts Eve before she eats the fruit? And he's like, that's what Milton does in Paradise Lost. And Paralandra, one thing to see Paralandra as is his attempt to present a story that's something like, how can you fall without falling? Or how can you be tempted, really tempted? How can you make a real moral choice before you've fallen?
Yes.
And he does it. I mean, I don't know that he does it, but he does like his idea is pretty interesting, which is, I think this came up last week. Yeah, that like you can corrupt someone's imagination without corrupting their will.
Yes.
And that provides the opportunity. Because look, one of the things that, this language, these different ways of talking about knowing, whatever way, let's just take the Spanish way, right? Saber and conocer, to know and to be familiar with. If you look at the biblical narrative, what does it say? God says, don't do this and don't do this, right? Here's some commands: be fruitful and multiply, name the animal and subdue the earth, name the animals. And then he says, don't eat from this tree. Eat from everything else, don't eat from this tree. So they have a saber knowledge of do this, don't do that. Great. What they don't have is a conocer knowledge of evil. They haven't become familiar with it, right? It's like
right.
And so to me, the answer is something like that, which is essentially, what is the knowledge of good and evil from that tree? I don't know. I mean, I'll say some of the stuff I've heard from the fathers makes me question this, but I'm at least throwing this out there is like that, like when you just, how can you know evil except by participating in disobedience? How can you have a participatory knowledge of evil without actually doing it? And so that's what it is. It's like, here's the command: don't break the command. You've broken the commandment. Now you'll go evil. It's like, I know evil. I've become familiar with it, right? It's made its home with me. So yeah, there's some really interesting, especially thinking as a parent, right? Because I think that an issue that a lot of parents have is that they tend to look at it one way or the other, where they say, hey, there's evil in the world, so it kind of doesn't matter how my child interacts with it because they're going to interact with it. And the other one is, if my child knows evil, then they'll commit it. It's like, all are not true. Neither of those are true. Now, what's interesting is there's actually a category of evil that if you communicate it, you participate in it. And so, but taking that aside, you can go up a high enough level where you can talk about evil without participating in it.
Because otherwise, how would you know? And that's the problem. And actually, Mathieu Pageau, and he clarified it today on Twitter, which I found interesting. He says it's the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and bad and he makes evil a subset of bad. And I'm not bought in yet because I got to think about it, and it's gonna like maybe I'll never be bought in, maybe I'll never be able to think about it. But I was just like, that is a fascinating frame. That is idea.
So I've heard that back kind of. Sorry, Cindy.
I was just saying, I'm just still sitting here thinking about some of the things that looking at some of the things I'm learning in the Jewish take on things, that Christians tend to think good and evil, and we have one understanding of those being in complete and utter contrast, as in, like you say, good and bad. Whereas in Judaism, I still haven't got my head around God made good and evil, and we go, what? But when you look at it from some of the context there, it's it's like the thing and the imprint of the thing. The thing and the nothing, where they were saying that somebody was saying they wish they'd put in the one reading. I have memory issues, by the way. I have had awareness of memory issues since I was 12, so it's not getting old. But when you talk about nothing is blurred together, we have one word, but if it's no thing, no thingness, and all that discussion, I'm still pondering those places because I find it absolutely fascinating, especially in terms of some of the things I've gone through with my son, where I'm thinking, where did all that language go? We
compressed it to the opposite, which doesn't exist, right? It's like evil or bad, or however you want to cast it, is not the opposite of good, because in order for it to be an opposite, there'd have to be an equivalency, but there's far less good in the world, which is why you have to struggle to manifest it or to redeem the bad, right? And there's a lot more bad. So it's not a binary. It's not a one-to-one relationship. It doesn't work that way. And that's why the no thingness is basically just a trick, right? It's an identification against explicitly. And that's why I don't think it's useful to think about things that way at all.
I think my take on the no thingness is basically that it's just an attempt at the apophatic theology that you get from like Dionysius the Areopagite and on, where it's like, look, we're talking about limitations. We're talking about limitations of language,
and I haven't thought through those things. All I've done is gone. I love, there was one analogy about the, concave, the inside and the outside of something, and I was like, I'm thinking there is something there I haven't completely touched.
Well, there's a lot of things there. I mean, this is, it's weird because Vervaeke doesn't understand it, but he talks about it perfectly well, right? Where there's not just, there's not just me and the things outside of me. That doesn't make any sense, because in a way, of course, there's me and the things outside of me, but there's also my relationship to them. And that changes everything, because now it's not an either or, because the relationship is that third thing. And that's where everything breaks down with thingness versus no thingness, because again, they're not the opposites. They're not equivalents at all.
No. And are they even on a paradigm where we understand their placement, like what Chad was saying with him and the asphalt that suddenly landed at their feet?
It's like materialistic. If you're a materialist and you need to break out of the materialism because you can't explain the world with materialism, obviously, but whatever, we'll just slide right past that obvious point. Then you start saying nonsense like no thingness to break out of the material, where there must be something past the materialism. It's like, it's called the spiritual realm or the ethereal realm. And then the problems go away, except that that's much more complicated than what, say, John Vervaeke would like, because he just wants to extend rationality to science everything.
Well,
are you talking about just figuring out how you can assume there's an actual explanation you can give to everything?
No, there isn't an explanation for all the non-material things, but you don't need it. This is the problem is needing an explanation. You're not going to get one, and you don't need it.
Well, that's what I was asking, if the attempt was being made to provide one.
Well, what's funny is, so here's what's interesting, is that the articulation of the greatest blessing that could possibly, the best thing that could possibly happen to a person by the church is the beatific vision, which is to see the cause of all causes. And I think it's Aristotle that says, happy is the man who knows the causes of things. Is that right? Yeah.
Something like that.
And so I wish I could find this passage. Emma, I don't know if you know it, but Aquinas picks that up and says, look, the most basic form of thing that makes people happy is to see why something happened. And so the greater the cause, in its explanatory power, the greater the happiness. And therefore we conclude that man's ultimate beatitude is to look into God and see the cause of all causes, because there's nothing, which is interesting. I mean, like in a real sense, like that's why we're all sitting here talking now, because we want to know causes of things. Like really, like we want to know, like we'd like what it's not a survivor. It's not, look, we die when we don't know the causes of things, not because we can't like accurately navigate reality because we don't know causes. You don't have to know causes to be able, like animals do this all the time. Plants do this all the time.
Children.
Babies do it all the time. But we will die because it's like, well, I don't know why this is happening to me. This doesn't make sense, and it'll destroy us. It's like, that's really interesting. I think, look, okay, there's no thingness. There's another way to look at it, and I think when I hear that, what I think they're talking about is the difference between, golly, they're talking about classical theism, which is essentially that God is non-contingent being, right? That there's everything we see, everything we've ever encountered directly, that's contingent being in the sense that it derives its being from somewhere else, and that's what we call it a thing. Things are, and then there's like some source. If we're going to talk about the source of all of that being, what's the being that contains its own cause? That's really the question. Like, what's the thing that what is that which causes itself? And if you don't want to talk about a person,
I'm sorry, I'm sitting here thinking the most stupid question. It's okay.
If you don't want to talk about it as being a person, then you have to, with a name, then you have to come up with some other name, but it's not a thing because it's the source of all things, and so you have to call it no thing.
So limited
like, I get it. Yeah. I like that. To me, that makes perfect sense. I'm like, I see exactly. I see that, and that's fine. I'm like, okay, if you want to use that language, like, I think I know the direction that you're pointing. I don't know if we're talking about the same. Again, right? I was about to say the same thing, but obviously we're not talking about the same thing because it's not a thing. It's a.
So now
the same non-thing.
Kind of scrambled egg your brain. What I'm actually thinking about is your other words.
What's that again? What's the other word?
Your other word, not the one that starts with the S. Spanish.
Oh, saber, not conocer. Yeah.
Not conocer, saber. Is that the one you said is used sometimes for taste?
Yeah.
That's all I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about the word saber and taste, and wondering if anybody actually likes how your tongue feels when it tastes a smile.
Oh, I like that.
I'm sorry. I swear to God, that's all that's going through my mind. I absolutely love that.
Amazing. But I just want to throw this one, since we're on the subject of things that are interesting to me about Spanish grammar. There's different past tenses. Okay, speaking of contrast, first of all, I didn't understand English grammar at all until I learned Spanish. That's when I learned English grammar. Like, I had gone through like 6 years of English grammar, and then I learned Spanish, and that's when I learned English grammar. I was like, oh, that's what all this stuff is. So there you go. That's interesting. But the verb to go, ir, and the verb to be, ser, the more stable is when you put it in the past tense. It's not the on. There's like an ongoing past tense. The past imperfect?
Imperfect.
Yeah.
I've never been able to do it. I just love words and putting them in order.
And then there's the preterite, which would be like I was doing. That's the imperfect versus I did. That's the preterite. Okay.
It's simple. You could also call it the simple past.
The simple past. So the verb to be and the verb to go in the simple past are the same. They're conjugated the same. Like I went, yo fui, and I was, yo fui. And what's so interesting about that, I mean, I feel like there's like probably hours of discussion in that, but it never made any sense to me. I thought this is a confusing, obnoxious thing until one time someone was asking about an order of like when people, we were going on a zip line because that's what you do when you're learning Spanish in Central America. And I was like, yo fui primero. And I was like, I realized that I had both said I was first and I went first.
I went first.
It's like either one works. It's the same thing. And you start to realize there's these bizarre situations, these convergences of was and went, same thing. Like you can't, it's the same meaning. We just like don't think about them, but they end up having the same. There's this, right. It just makes me think that there's something really weird going on there between grammar and space-time. And I can't.
There is, because
the other languages do that, where they liken your existence and your movement to the same thing.
All the languages do that, because when you analyze the language, you create an ontology. And when you create the ontology, it's imperfect.
Yeah.
And that's what causes that problem. Yeah, I knew no English grammar, even though I was always excellent in English and like scored out on it at ridiculous levels when I was young. But until I learned Latin. And then I was like, what the hell is all these future imperfect past? I don't know, you know, and then I was like, oh, I see what they're doing. But yeah, when you look at it and you go, oh, wait a minute, you don't need this stuff. Because in Latin, everything's like Latin is as close to a computer language as you're ever going to get in a spoken language. It's beautiful. But you want beauty. Latin is beautiful. I don't know any Latin.
I do tend to agree with that.
I failed all of it, but it's gorgeous, right? But the thing is, yeah, these things collapse because you don't need all those categories. The categories actually collapse in the speech.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it always reminds me, I mean, it reminds me of that wonderful example from Jordan Peterson talking about this guy asking him, how do I know if I can pick up the newspaper in the subway and read it? I love that example so much. It gets just so good. He's like, sits there and tries to like think out, you know, this like tree diagram of how could I explain these things? And it's like, well, I can't. It just immediately blows up. And it's the same kind of thing where it's like, when do I use? So like to go back to those two verbs for to know in Spanish, it's like, when do I use these? It's like, you can sort of diagram it kind of, but like, you actually don't need to. You could just operate in it. And like,
right.
It's that process of becoming aware of it. That's another step. Like you were, and I don't know if exactly where you're going with like creating an ontology, but there is a difference between unconsciously speaking a language and consciously speaking it.
Exactly.
They're very different.
One's ontological and the other isn't. Like your conscious mind is ontological because it tends to do the procedural propositional thing. And that's the problem with rationality. But the thing is, you don't need rationality to operate as a being in the world. Like your pigs know how to run away from the bear, right? Like, unless you put them in a pen, you monster. Yes. That's right. So normally, like kids don't need this, babies don't need this, and yet they survive. Now, sure, they get a lot of their agency from us, right? But that means that we can't live alone. That's all that means. And that you don't live alone. You think you do, but you're relying on all kinds of people in the past, all kinds of people in the present, and the hope for the future just to survive. It's not just you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Just something you said, and that makes it's just another thing that I want to throw out. I don't know if you guys have ever watched either the film version or read the book of Children of Men.
Sorry, closest I came to it was I recognized the title.
Okay,
I did read the Wikipedia entry because like YouTube algo fed me a clip from it recently.
Very, very different stories in their telling. I mean, basically like there's no more babies. It's like 28 years into no one having babies. And the PD, what is her name?
Oh,
I want to call it PD. It's not PD Wodehouse because PD Wodehouse wrote the Jeeves stories. What is her name? James. Her last name is James. Any rate.
James.
PD James. Yeah, I think that's right. And then there was, is it Alfonso Cuarón maybe made the film version?
Yes.
So the concept is the same, very different execution, but it's just a really interesting exercise in terms of you're sitting there with a movie and you think all of these people individually, like nothing should have changed for them in terms of say their capacity to enjoy and life and like experience physical pleasure and self-actualize and all these things, like the fact that there's no babies shouldn't matter, because like, what are you going to do? It's like, you're not going to be alive. You know, once you're dead, you're not alive anymore. Right. And yet like the whole thing plays out and you're like, you realize that it's just a total catastrophe and that like, we're completely incapable of doing anything. And so there's this exactly, I mean, it's one thing to look at tradition, and then it's another thing to also recognize that like you're embedded both directions, and that as I've been putting it, like the present derives its meaning from the future. Like we know what the present means based on what happens in the future. To the point, Mark, about purpose.
Oh no, I know what it was.
About purpose in biology, right? I mean, as soon as you see, it's like all of these actions that a bird does building a nest mean nothing until the nest. And that's what it was. It's like the present is being drawn into the future by the nest, right? Yes. That's what all those actions mean. It's not just this like building these things up. And so when you cut it all off and you say there's nothing after this, that's it, then nothing that you do now can possibly mean anything.
And it all just falls apart.
It does, until there's a baby.
Well, tradition is dead if the postmoderns are right and we only have the present. There's no reason for tradition because it's just a reflection of the past. But actually, tradition is the thing that holds us a scaffolding to create the future and guide that future so that it doesn't go horribly wrong. And then let's just imagine a hypothetical world where communication was super fast and everybody was overconnected. Now, all of a sudden, what's holding the future together? Well, we don't know, because it's a flood of information and a flood of ideas and a flood of things that you can do. And now you have too many choices, and none of those choices have anything holding them together because they're not embedded in your tradition. And the tradition informs you, like I said, with the, like no Catholic theologian is going to get too tied up on these deep Protestant questions because they've been participating all along, right? Not if they got in late, but if they were in it in the beginning, they don't get tied up with these quote deep questions because it's already assumed in the tradition. It's not necessary. Like you're going through unnecessary pain of relearning something that the ancestors encoded in the action of the ritual, basically.
Yeah. Lex Orandi, Lex Credendi. Right, Emma?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Y'all, Mark, you're welcome to keep running this. I'm beat though. So I'm gonna have to get out of here.
I'll run it for a bit if people want, but have a good night, Ted. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Head to sleep.
We've got 9 people watching, so Mark and Emma, if you guys want to hang out a little longer. But I should
probably dip too. It's been a long weekend.
Nobody loves me, Ted. Nobody. I have my own live streams. If they love me,
all right. Well, we'll stick a pin in it, and we'll be back here next Sunday, God willing. Same bat time, same bat channel.
That might be your last Sunday, isn't it?
What's that?
Is that your last Sunday? Isn't Father Eric going to be back from? I
don't know. Maybe. I mean,
assuming
same bat time, same different bat channel. In that case, I don't know. But Sunday.
We've got at least, I would guess, 2 more weeks though. There's 2 more weeks left in July.
I think so. I don't know. I'm just here until all those parables about the servant who just is like taking care of stuff until the master comes back. I'm just gonna keep.
Yeah, it might be a couple more weeks. Might be 2 or 3 weeks.
I just don't want him to show up and be like, I'm gonna take your head off because of how you manage this.
No, he thinks you're doing
Father Eric wouldn't do that anyway.
No, Father Eric's lovely. Father Eric is lovely. No, I'm just joking. Well, y'all have a wonderful night. Sandy, you in particular, because we haven't had you around in a while, so it was lovely. And Mark and Emma, thanks as always.
It was fun to actually say thank you, because I'm often sometimes I go and listen to Rabbi Malott on Sunday evenings. He has a thing, but he hasn't been running it right now. He's in between topics. Yeah. So.
Well, you're lovely. It's that sort of.
I love poetry. I love art, and I love language in particular. So.
Well, that is what we're going to be talking about in Arkansas, November 17th and 18th on
No
poetry.
Can Do.
I know, Sandy. I know you can't. So
give the announcement, Ted.
Probably going to be a lot of people who are close by who can just get in the car and drive. So,
take good notes, take good videos. Promise I'll follow.
We'll get it all. We'll get it all recorded for you. So don't worry about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Y'all have a great night.
All right.
You
That's
too.
See you
it.
later. Have a good week.